Sergeant Michael Dawson reached down, grabbed the steel latch on the most dangerous war dog in the entire facility, looked the new woman dead in the eyes, and pulled the gate wide open. 110 pounds of trained aggression came out of that kennel like a bullet, teeth flashing, aimed straight at Specialist Emily Carter, and Dawson didn't flinch, didn't warn her, didn't say a single word. He just crossed his arms and waited for her to scream, because in his mind, she had it coming. She was an outsider, and outsiders didn't last a day on his base. If you are watching this story right now, do me one favor before we go any further. Hit that subscribe button and stay with me all the way to the end, because this one gets more powerful with every minute. And down in the comments, tell me the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Type it right now. I read every single one. Now let's get back to Emily Carter and the two words that stopped a war dog cold. Nobody came to greet her. That was the first thing Emily noticed when she stepped through the gates of the Naval Special Warfare K-9 Training Center in San Diego. No handshake, no escort, no one holding a clipboard with her name on it. Just a long stretch of concrete, the smell of hot dust, and a row of men in the distance who looked up when she arrived and then looked away like she wasn't worth the effort of remembering. She'd been in rooms like this before. Rooms where the air changed the second she walked in. Rooms where men measured her in 3 seconds and decided she didn't belong. She was 34 years old and she had spent almost a decade learning how to keep her face calm while people underestimated her. So she kept walking. Her boots hit the pavement in a steady rhythm, and she carried her own bag because no one offered to carry it, and she wasn't the kind of woman who waited for someone to offer. A younger handler near the equipment shed nudged the man beside him and muttered something. Emily couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She knew the shape of that kind of whisper. She'd heard it in Afghanistan, she'd heard it in Germany, she'd heard it in every unit that had ever handed her a dog and expected her to fail. "That's the behavioral specialist," one of them said loud enough now that she could hear. "Headquarters sent her to teach us how to train." The other man laughed. "Teach us? She's never even been downrange." Emily didn't stop. She didn't turn her head. She just filed it away the way she filed everything away, and she kept moving toward the main building where a man was standing in the doorway watching her come. She knew who he was before anyone said his name. Sergeant Michael Dawson had a reputation that traveled faster than any email. 15 years with military working dogs, combat deployments most men only read about, a track record of building animals that performed under fire, that cleared buildings, that saved lives with their noses and their teeth. He was the most respected K-9 instructor on the base, and everyone on that base knew it, and so did he. He was maybe 50 broad, through the shoulders gray coming in at the temples, and he had the kind of stillness that came from a man who was completely certain he was right about everything. He didn't smile when she reached him. "You're Carter," he said. It wasn't a question. "Specialist Emily Carter." She extended her hand. He looked at her hand. He didn't take it. "You're the one they sent to fix us," he said. "I'm the one they sent to help," she answered. Dawson's jaw moved slightly like he was chewing on the word help and finding it bitter. "We don't need help. We've got the best working dogs in the country in these kennels. Every one of them trained by me. Every one of them ready to deploy." Emily lowered her hand slowly. She didn't let it bother her. She'd been refused a handshake before. "Then I'll just observe," she said. "That's all I'm here to do at first. Watch. Learn how you run things." "Watch." Dawson repeated the word like it tasted wrong too. "You know what happens when people come here to watch? They start thinking they understand something. And then they start telling my handlers that everything they've bled for is wrong. I'm not here to tell anyone they're wrong. Aren't you?" There was a long moment where neither of them moved. The men in the yard had drifted closer, pretending to work, all of them listening. Emily could feel that the whole base was watching this first conversation, and everyone already knew whose side they were on. "Sergeant," Emily said quietly, "I've worked with Special Operations K-9 units for 8 years, overseas, in places I can't talk about and neither can you. I'm not a tourist, and I'm not here to take anything away from you." Something flickered behind Dawson's eyes. Just for a second. Then it was gone, replaced by the flat certainty he wore like armor. "We'll see," he said. And that's when Emily understood exactly what kind of day she was about to have. Because Dawson didn't turn and walk her inside. He didn't show her the office or the schedule or the roster. He turned and walked out toward the training field, and he raised his voice so every handler on that base could hear him. Everybody gather up. Our new specialist wants to observe, so let's give her something to observe. Emily's stomach tightened. She'd seen this before too. The demonstration, the test, the public trial designed to break the outsider in front of an audience. The handlers came fast, 15, maybe 20 of them forming a loose half circle around the training yard. Some of them were grinning already. A few looked uncomfortable, like they knew something bad was about to happen and didn't have the rank to stop it. Dawson walked her over to a row of kennels along the fence line, and he stopped in front of the last one. The biggest one, the one with reinforced steel and a warning sign bolted to the gate. Inside, something moved. Emily looked in and she felt her heart change rhythm. It was a Belgian Malinois, enormous for the breed. Lean-muscled, all-coiled energy, the kind of dog that didn't pace in a kennel because it was bored, but because it was containing something that wanted out. Its eyes locked onto her the instant she appeared, and they didn't blink and they didn't soften. "This is Ranger," Dawson said. "Best numbers in the unit. Fastest apprehension times we've ever recorded. He's also the most aggressive animal on this base. We don't let strangers near him. We don't let most of my own handlers near him." Emily kept her eyes on the dog. "He's beautiful." Dawson blinked like the compliment threw him. Then he recovered. "He's a weapon." "He's a Emily said softly. "A very stressed dog." That did it. Dawson's face hardened into something cold. "Stressed? You've been here 20 minutes and you're already diagnosing my best canine as stressed." "I'm not diagnosing anything. I'm watching him. Look at his shoulders. Look at how he's holding his tail. That's not confidence, Sergeant. That's pressure." A few of the handlers exchanged glances. One of them, a younger guy with a sunburned neck, actually leaned in to look at the dog's shoulders like maybe she had a point. Dawson caught it, and it made him angrier. "You want to know what pressure is," Dawson said. "Pressure is what makes a great war dog. Pressure is what saves lives when everything goes wrong. My dogs don't fail because they're not allowed to fail. That's the difference between your science and the real world." "And what happens?" Emily asked. "When a dog is never allowed to fail, but he's hurting. What happens when he keeps performing through pain because you taught him that stopping isn't an option?" The yard went quiet. Dawson stared at her for a long, long moment, and then he did the thing that Emily would remember for the rest of her life. He reached down, he grabbed the latch on Ranger's gate, and he looked at her and said, "Let's find out what you know." "Sergeant, don't." "You said you're not a tourist." Dawson's voice was flat and hard. "So let's see it. Let's see all that experience." "Dawson, that dog will hurt someone." "That dog," he said, "does exactly what I trained him to do." And he pulled the gate open. Later, some of the handlers would say they saw it happen in slow motion. Others would say it was over in less than 3 seconds. Both were true, the way those things are always both true. Ranger came out of that kennel like an explosion. There was no hesitation, no warning growl, no buildup. 90 pounds of drive turned into 110 pounds of forward motion straight at the woman standing alone in the middle of the yard. The handlers stepped back, all of them, even the ones who'd wanted to help. Instinct took over, and they got out of the way because that was a trained apprehension dog in full drive, and there was nothing anyone could do now. Somebody yelled, somebody else laughed, a short, ugly bark of a laugh, the kind that comes out when you're nervous and cruel at the same time. They all expected the same thing. They expected Emily to run. They expected her to scream and turn and try to make it to the fence, which would have been the worst thing that she could possibly do, because nothing triggers a chase drive faster than prey that flees. They expected her to panic. She did none of it. Emily Carter did not run. She did not scream. She did not raise her arms or brace for impact or do any of the dozen things a frightened person does when a war dog is bearing down on them. She went still. Completely impossibly still. She lowered her shoulders. She softened her hands at her sides. She turned her body just slightly, not square to the dog, not confrontational, just a fraction of an angle that said, I am not a threat and I am not prey. And she looked at Ranger not into his eyes like a challenge, but at him, all of him, the way you look at someone you already understand. And in the last few feet, when the dog was so close that the handlers could see the muscles bunching for the leap, Emily Carter did the only thing left to do. She spoke. Not loud, not sharp, not a command shouted in fear. She whispered, two words, in German. The language these dogs were trained in, the language buried underneath all the aggression, the language that meant home to an animal that had probably forgotten what home felt like. Alles gut. Everything is okay. And the world stopped. Ranger's front legs locked. His body dropped, low momentum, still carrying him forward, claws scraping against the concrete as he skidded. His head came up, his ears, which had been pinned flat in drive, twitched, and that huge, dangerous, coiled animal came to a complete stop, inches from her boots, not attacking, not lunging, not even growling anymore, just standing there, breathing hard, looking up at the woman who had refused to be afraid of him and had spoken to him in the one language that reached the part of him that was still underneath everything, just a dog who wanted someone to tell him it was okay. The training field went silent. Not the ordinary quiet of people who've stopped talking. This was the silence of 20 grown men, hardened operators, veterans of things they'd never speak about, all standing frozen because they had just watched something they had been taught was impossible. The most aggressive dog on the base had stopped. For her. For the woman nobody had wanted. The woman they'd whispered about. The woman they'd expected to break. She hadn't broken. She hadn't even moved. Emily crouched down, slowly keeping her movements smooth, and she held out the back of her hand, low and easy. And Ranger, that 110-pound war dog, leaned in and pressed his nose against her knuckles. Somebody in the back exhaled a word that wasn't quite a curse and wasn't quite a prayer. And Sergeant Michael Dawson stood at the open gate with his hand still on the latch. And for the first time in 15 years, he had absolutely no idea what he had just seen. Emily didn't gloat. That was the thing that would confuse Dawson for weeks afterward. She didn't turn around with a smug look on her face. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't even look at him. She stayed crouched next to Ranger, talking to him in that same low German murmur, and the dog stayed close to her, and slowly, one by one, his muscles unwound. His tail, which had been rigid, began to move. Just a little. Just enough for anyone who knew dogs to understand that something had shifted in the animal that Dawson had spent 3 years convinced could never shift. When she finally stood up, she looked at Dawson, and she didn't say anything cruel. She just said, "You can put him away now. He's done enough for today." And she walked past him, past all of them, and she went to find her quarters because it had been a long day, and it wasn't even noon. The handlers didn't move for a while. They stood in that half circle, and they looked at Ranger, who was now sitting calmly, tongue out, watching the woman walk away like he wanted to follow her. The young handler with the sunburned neck was the first one to speak. His name was Tyler Brooks, and he was 26 years old, and he'd been on this base for 2 years, and he had never once been able to get within 10 feet of Ranger without the dog going into a frenzy. "Sergeant," he said carefully, "how did she do that?" Dawson closed the kennel gate. His hand was steady. His voice was not. "Get him back in his run." "But Sergeant, that dog nearly took my arm off last month and she just—" "Brooks." The young man stopped. Dawson turned around and the look on his face was one none of them had seen before. It wasn't anger. It was something more dangerous than anger. It was doubt. And on a man like Dawson, doubt was terrifying because it meant the ground he'd been standing on for 15 years had just moved half an inch, and half an inch was enough to make a man question everything. "Get the dog put away," he said, "and nobody talks about what happened here today." But of course they talked about it. By dinner, every person on the base had heard some version of the story. The woman who whispered to Ranger. The dog that stopped inches away. The specialist who didn't flinch when the most aggressive K9 in the program came at her full speed. And in the mess hall that night, Emily Carter sat alone at the end of a long table, eating quietly, aware that every single person in that room was stealing glances to answer at her and pretending they weren't. She was used to that, too. What she wasn't used to was the young handler who suddenly sat down across from her with a tray of food and a nervous expression. "Ma'am," Tyler Brooks said, "mind if I sit?" "You already did." He almost smiled. "Fair point." He set his tray down. "I'm Brooks, Tyler Brooks. I handle a shepherd named Shadow. And I just wanted to say—" He stopped. He seemed to be deciding whether he was allowed to say what he wanted to say. "I've been trying to work with Ranger for a year. Everybody has. And what you did today, I've never seen anything like it. So I don't care what Sergeant Dawson says. I want to know how you did it." Emily set down her fork. She studied the young man for a moment, and she saw something in him she liked. He was scared to be sitting there. Sitting with her was probably going to cost him, and he'd done it anyway. I didn't do anything to Ranger, she said. That's the part people don't understand. I didn't control him. I didn't dominate him. I didn't outmuscle him. Then what did you do? I told him the truth. Emily picked her fork back up. He came at me expecting a fight because that's the only thing anyone's ever given him. Fights, pressure, corrections, commands. And when he got close and I didn't fight back and I didn't run and I spoke to him in the language he was raised in and I told him everything was okay, I gave him something nobody on this base has given him in a very long time. What? A choice. Tyler Brooks stared at her. That dog, Emily said quietly, has been performing under so much pressure for so long that he's forgotten he's allowed to stop. He doesn't run drills because he wants to. He runs them because he's terrified of what happens if he fails. And a dog that's terrified of failing looks incredible on paper. Fast times, perfect apprehensions, best numbers in the unit, your sergeant said. She shook her head. But that's not confidence, son. That's fear wearing a mask. And fear breaks, sooner or later. It always breaks. Tyler was quiet for a long time. You said something about Shadow, Emily added. My shepherd, tell me about him. Something in Tyler's face changed. He looked down at his tray. He's not doing so good, honestly. He used to be the best dog I ever worked with. Loved the job, loved everything. And then a few months ago, he struggled for the word. Shut down. He does the drills. He does everything he's told. But it's like the light went out. He doesn't play anymore. He won't touch a tight team. I've tried everything. Dawson says he's just getting older, that some dogs lose their drive, that we might have to retire him. Does Shadow seem old to you? Emily asked. No, that's the thing. He's only 6. He should have years left. Emily nodded slowly. I'd like to meet him tomorrow, if that's all right. Yeah. Tyler looked up, and there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Hope, maybe, or the first crack in a wall he hadn't known he was living behind. Yeah, I'd like that. Across the mess hall, Sergeant Dawson watched the two of them talking, and his hands tightened around his coffee cup. He wasn't a stupid man. That was the thing people got wrong about him. They saw a stubborn old sergeant clinging to the old ways, and they assumed there was nothing behind it but ego. But Dawson had reasons. He'd built his methods over 15 years in places where a soft dog got people killed, where hesitation meant a handler didn't come home, where the difference between a dog that obeyed instantly and a dog that thought about it was the difference between life and death. He'd watched a friend die once because a dog froze. He never talked about that. But it lived in him every single day, and it was the reason he pushed his animals the way he did. He wasn't cruel. He was scared. Scared of the alternative. Scared of what happened when a dog wasn't ready. And now this woman had walked onto his base and in one afternoon made him wonder if everything he'd built on the back of that fear was wrong. He hated her for it. He didn't want to, but he did. Because if she was right, then maybe he'd been hurting the very animals he'd spent his life protecting. And that was a thought no man could sit with easily. The next morning, Emily was up before dawn. She found Tyler Brooks waiting by the shepherd kennels, and together they walked to Shadow's Run. The dog was in the back corner, curled up small, and he lifted his head when they approached but didn't get up. See, Tyler said softly, this is how he is now, all the time. Emily didn't go in right away. She crouched outside the gate at a distance, and she didn't reach for the dog, didn't call to him, didn't do anything except sit there quietly and let the dog get used to her being near. What are you doing? Tyler whispered. Waiting, Emily said. He needs to decide I'm safe. I can't decide it for him. They waited. 5 minutes. 10. Tyler shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the stillness, but Emily didn't move. And after 15 minutes, something happened. Shadow got up, slowly, stiffly, and he crossed the kennel and came to the gate, and he pressed his nose against the chain link right where Emily was crouched, and he took a long breath of her. Hey there, Emily murmured. Hey, buddy, there you are. He came to you, Tyler breathed. He never does that. He's not broken, Emily said. That's what I need you to understand. Everybody keeps saying he's done, he's old, he's lost his drive. He's none of those things. He's grieving. Grieving? Dogs feel lost just like we do. Something happened to this dog. some kind of pressure, some kind of fear, something he couldn't process, and instead of dealing with it, everyone just kept demanding he perform. So he learned to go somewhere else, inside himself, where nobody could reach him. Emily reached out slow and let Shadow sniff her fingers through the fence. But he's still in there. You just have to give him a reason to come back out. Tyler crouched down next to her, and for a long moment, the two of them just sat there with the dog, and something in the young handler's chest, it ached in a way he didn't have words for. "Can you teach me," he asked finally, "to do what you do?" Emily looked at him. "It's not a trick, Brooks. It's not a technique you learn in an afternoon. It's a whole way of seeing them. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. It'll change how you do this job forever. It might even make it harder for you here." She glanced in the direction of the main building. "Because not everybody's going to want you to see it." "I don't care," Tyler said. "I want to learn." And that was the moment Emily Carter knew she'd found her first ally on a base full of people who wanted her gone. She just didn't know yet how much that alliance was going to cost both of them. Word got back to Dawson within the hour because word always got back to Dawson. He found Emily near the equipment shed, reviewing training logs, and he didn't waste time on greetings. "You're already turning my handlers against me," he said. Emily looked up calmly. "I'm not turning anyone against anyone. Brooks asked me to look at his dog." I looked at his dog. "His dog is fine. His dog is suffering Sergeant, and I think somewhere in there you already know that." Dawson's face went hard. "You want to know what I know? I know. I've deployed dogs that came home. I know handlers who are alive because their K9 did exactly what I trained it to do without hesitating, without thinking, without needing to be told everything is okay first." He leaned in. "Out there is no okay. There's the mission, and there's death, and a dog that stops to feel its feelings is a dog that gets its handler killed." And there it was. Emily heard it. Underneath all the anger, underneath the certainty, she heard the thing that was actually driving him. "Who did you lose?" she asked quietly. Dawson went completely still. "That's what this is about," Emily said, and her voice was gentle now, not accusing, just honest. "You lost someone, and a dog was involved. And ever since you have been building animals that will never, ever freeze. Because you couldn't save whoever it was, but by God, you'll make sure it never happens to anyone else." For one terrible second, Dawson's mask slipped, just for a heartbeat. And Emily saw the grief underneath, old and deep, and never dealt with the exact same grief she'd seen curled up in the back of Shadow's kennel. Then the mask slammed back down. "You don't know anything about me," he said. "No," Emily agreed. "I don't. But I'd like to, because I think you and I want the same thing, Sergeant. We both want these dogs to come home. We both want their handlers to come home. We just disagree about how to get there. We don't want the same thing." Dawson straightened up. "You want to turn my warriors into pets, and I won't let you." He turned to walk away, and then he stopped, and he said the words that would define everything that came next. "There's an evaluation coming. Major one. A special operations deployment, and they're sending inspectors to certify our dogs. It was supposed to be in 3 weeks. He looked back at here. "I moved it up. It's now in 7 days. Emily felt something cold slide through her. 7 days. These dogs aren't ready for... "They're ready," Dawson said. "My dogs are always ready. And when those inspectors watch them perform, when they see the times and the apprehensions and everything I've built, they're going to certify this unit as the best in the country. And your soft little theories are going to look exactly like what they are." He almost smiled. "A waste of everyone's time." He walked away. And Emily stood there in the morning heat holding the training logs, and she understood that Dawson had just declared war. He'd moved the evaluation up on purpose. 7 days. Not enough time for her to prove anything. Not enough time to help Shadow or Ranger or any of the dogs she could already see were quietly falling apart. Just enough time for the old methods to look impressive on paper one last time in front of the people whose opinion mattered most. He was going to use the evaluation to destroy her. And the worst part, the part that sat in her stomach like a stone, was that she'd already seen something in Ranger's gate that morning. Something small. Something wrong. The way he'd favored one side just slightly when he'd come to the fence to see her, that dog was hurting. And if Dawson pushed him through a full evaluation in 7 days, through the most demanding drills, through the pressure and the pace and the relentless, never-stop training, that had made his number so impressive, that injury was going to get worse. Someone could get hurt. The dog, a handler, anyone. Emily looked down at the logs in her hands, and then she looked out at the row of kennels, and she made a decision that she knew was going to put her against the entire base. She wasn't going to let it happen. She didn't know how yet. She didn't have the rank. She didn't have the allies except one nervous young handler and his grieving dog. She didn't have anything except 8 years of experience and the certainty that she was right. But she was going to find a way. That afternoon, she went back to Ranger's kennel. Alone, she didn't tell anyone. The dog was pacing when she got there, that same cold energy, but the second he saw her, he stopped. He came to the gate, and Emily crouched down and spoke to him in low German, the same 2 words from the day before, and then more whole soft sentences that didn't mean anything except, "I see you and you're safe and you don't have to fight anymore." And as she watched him, she confirmed what she'd feared. He was shifting his weight off his right hind leg, subtly, so subtly that a handler running him through fast drills would never notice, because Ranger would never show it, because Ranger had been trained his whole life to never, ever reveal weakness. He was in pain, and he was hiding it, because he thought that's what he was supposed to do. Emily felt her throat tighten. "Oh, buddy," she whispered. "What have they done to you?" Ranger pressed his big head against the fence, and Emily reached through and rested her hand on his neck, and the two of them stayed like that for a long time as the sun dropped lower over the base. She didn't hear Dawson come up behind her. He'd come to check on his best dog the way he did every evening, and he'd stopped when he saw her there kneeling in the dirt with her hand on Ranger, and something about it froze him in place. He'd never seen Ranger stand like that. So calm, so open, head down, eyes soft, leaning into a human's touch. In 3 years, Dawson had never once gotten that dog to relax like that. And it was killing him. It was absolutely killing him. Because part of him, the part he'd buried under 15 years of certainty, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was what Ranger had needed all along. He almost said something. He almost walked over and asked her, really asked her how she did it. But then the old fear rose up, the grief, the memory of the friend he couldn't save, and it turned into anger, the way it always did. And he swallowed the question whole. He turned and walked away without a word. And Emily, still kneeling with the bois, felt him go. And she closed her eyes because she understood him better than he understood himself. And she knew that the hardest thing she was going to have to do on this base wasn't reaching the dogs. It was reaching the man. That night, Emily sat in her small quarters and pulled out her laptop and started writing. She documented everything. Ranger's gait, the weight shift, the favoring of the right hind leg, Shadow's withdrawal. The other dogs she'd observed, the German shepherd, who wouldn't leave the back of its kennel, the young Malinois, whose eyes were already going flat with the same pressure that had hollowed out Ranger. She wrote it all down, methodical and careful, building the case she knew she was going to need. Because when the moment came, and it was coming, she wasn't going to be able to stop Dawson with feelings. He didn't respect feelings. She was going to have to stop him with proof. And she had 7 days to gather it. She worked until well past midnight, and when she finally closed the laptop, she sat in the dark for a while, and she thought about all the units she'd walked into over the years, all the men who'd looked at her and decided she didn't belong. Most of them had been wrong about her, and most of them in the end had come around. But Dawson was different. Dawson wasn't fighting her because she was a woman or because she was an outsider or because his ego was bruised. Those things were part of it, sure. But underneath all of it, Dawson was fighting her because she was making him afraid. Afraid that the thing he'd dedicated his entire life to might have been wrong. Afraid that the pressure he'd been so proud of had been quietly hurting the animals he loved. And a man that afraid was capable of anything. Emily lay down on the narrow bunk and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere out in the kennels, a dog was pacing on an injured leg, hiding its pain because it had been taught that pain was failure, and failure was unforgivable. In 7 days, the inspectors would arrive. In 7 days, Dawson was going to try to run that dog through hell to prove a point. And Emily Carter was going to have to decide how far she was willing to go to stop him. She already knew the answer. All the way. She'd go all the way, even if it turned the whole base against her, even if it cost her the job, even if it made her the most hated person on that installation. Because she'd looked into that dog's eyes and she'd made him a promise without saying a word. She wasn't going to let anyone break him. Not even a man with 15 years of reasons. Outside her window, the desert wind moved across the base, and in his kennel, Ranger stopped pacing. He lay down slowly, favoring the leg he wasn't supposed to favor, and he faced the direction of the small building where the woman was the one who had told him everything was okay. And for the first time in a very long time, the war dog closed his eyes and slept without fear. The days that followed would test everything Emily believed. They would push her to the edge of what she could endure, turn her allies into targets, and force a proud man to look at himself in a way he had spent his entire life avoiding. But that first day, the day they opened the gate and let a war dog charge her, the day she whispered 2 words and stopped him cold, that was the day everything began. Because Emily Carter had walked onto that base as the woman nobody expected. And she was about to become the woman none of them would ever forget. 6 days. That was what Emily woke up to. 6 days until the inspectors arrived and a base full of people who wanted her to fail. She got to the kennels before sunrise, and she wasn't surprised to find Tyler Brooks already there standing outside Shadow's run with 2 cups of coffee and a look on his face like a man who hadn't slept. "I brought you one," he said, holding out a cup. "Figured you'd be early." "You figured right." Emily took the coffee. "You didn't sleep." "No, ma'am." Tyler looked at his dog through the fence. Shadow was still in the back corner, but his head was up now, watching them. "I kept thinking about what you said, that he's grieving, that something happened to him." He swallowed. "And I think I know what it was." Emily went still. "Tell me." "About 4 months ago, we had an incident on a training exercise, a live scenario. Shadow was working a building clear, and there was a malfunction with one of the props. A loud one, right next to him." Tyler's voice tightened. "He didn't get hurt, not physically, but he froze. First time in his life, just locked up in the middle of the drill." "And what happened after he froze?" Tyler didn't answer right away. And in that silence, Emily already knew. "Dawson made an example of him," Tyler said quietly. "Ran him through the same scenario again, and again, and again. Said the only way to fix a freeze was to push through it. Said if we let a dog quit once, he'd quit when it counted." He looked at her with something raw in his eyes. "I stood there and I let him do it. I was Shadow's handler, and I let him break my dog because I didn't have the rank to stop it, and I didn't have the guts to try." That was the first crack. Emily watched it open up in him, 4 months of guilt he'd been carrying alone, and she didn't rush to fill it. "You were following orders," she said finally. "That's what I keep telling myself. Doesn't help." Tyler wiped his face with the back of his hand. "So can you fix him? Please, just tell me you can fix him." "I can't fix him," Emily said and watched Tyler's face fall. "But he can heal himself. If we give him the right conditions. If we stop asking him to be a machine and let him be a dog again." She set down her coffee. "It starts today, and it starts with you, not me. Because he's your partner. He needs to hear it from you." "Hear what?" "That it's okay. That you're not going to do it again." Tyler looked at his dog for a long moment. Then he opened the gate and went in and knelt down in the dirt, and Shadow lifted his head wary, ready for the pressure that always came. But Tyler didn't give a command. He just sat down beside his dog and put his hand on him, gentle. And he said, "I'm sorry, buddy. I should have protected you. I'm going to do better." And Shadow, who hadn't leaned into anyone in 4 months, dropped his head into Tyler's lap. The young man's shoulders started to shake. Emily turned away to give him privacy, and when she did, she saw a figure standing at the end of the kennel row. Dawson. He'd been watching the whole thing. 6 days out, 10 minutes past dawn, and the sergeant had just heard his own name spoken as the reason a dog was broken. Emily braced for the explosion. It didn't come. Dawson just looked at Tyler in the butt, and something moved across his face that Emily couldn't read, and then he turned and walked away. That was the first surprise of the day. It would not be the last. By mid-morning, Emily had a plan, and she knew it was going to make an enemy of everyone. She went to Dawson's office and knocked on the open door. He was at his desk, and he didn't look up. "I want to pull Ranger from the high-impact drills," she said, "for the evaluation. He can still work detection. He can still do controlled apprehension. But I want him off the building assaults and the long chases." Now Dawson looked up. "No, Garen. Sergeant, that dog is hurt. That dog set the base record for apprehension time last month. Does that sound hurt to you? It sounds like a dog performing through an injury because you taught him he's not allowed to stop." Emily stepped into the office. I watched his gait yesterday. He's favoring the right hind. It's subtle, but it's there. And if you run him through 6 days of full drills, that subtle becomes a tear, and a tear becomes a dog that goes down in the middle of a chase with a 200-pound handler on the line. Dawson stood up slowly. You want to pull my best dog from the evaluation right before inspectors come to certify this unit. You understand how that looks. I understand exactly how it looks. It looks like I'm right and you're scared. Emily didn't back down. Get him scanned. A vet exam. That's all I'm asking. If I'm wrong, run him in everything. I'll never say another word. But if I'm right, you're not right. Dawson came around the desk. You've been here 2 days. You think you know my dog better than I do. I've had my hands on that animal every single day for 3 years. Then how did you miss it? Emily said. That landed hard. Dawson's jaw clenched. You missed it. Emily went on softer now. Because you weren't looking for it. Because in your world, a dog that hurts is a dog that failed, and your dogs don't fail, so you trained yourself not to see it. I'm not smarter than you, Sergeant. I'm just not afraid to see it. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Dawson said, Get out of my office. Emily got out. But she didn't give up. That was the thing Dawson would learn about her day by day. She didn't fight loud and she didn't fight dirty, but she did not give up. That afternoon, without telling Dawson, she found the unit's veterinary tech, a quiet woman named Reyes, and she asked her one question. If I brought you a dog and asked you to scan a hind leg off the record, would you do it? Reyes looked at her for a long moment. You're the one who stopped Ranger. I'm the one. Half this base thinks you're a threat, and the other half thinks you're a miracle. Reyes almost smiled. Bring me the dog, I'll look. That was 5 days out. Getting Ranger to Reyes without Dawson knowing was its own kind of problem, and Emily solved it the only way she could. She told the truth to the one person she could trust. I need your help, she said to Tyler that evening, and it might get you in trouble. I'm already in trouble, Tyler said. What do you need? Ranger, to the vet. Tomorrow morning before Dawson does rounds. I need it scanned and I need it documented because when the moment comes, I'm going to need proof, not opinions. Tyler didn't hesitate. I'll help you move him. You understand if Dawson finds out? He broke my dog, Tyler said flatly. I let him do it once. I'm not letting him do it again to Ranger. And that was the second ally. Reyes made 3. It wasn't an army, but it was a start. The next morning, 4 days and change until the inspectors, they moved Ranger to the vet building before the base was fully awake. And Emily discovered that the guy who'd charged her on day 1 now walked beside her calmly on a loose lead, checking in with her every few steps, like he was making sure she was still there. Reyes scanned him, and when the images came up, she went quiet. Well, Emily asked. Reyes pointed at the screen. There, right hind, early stage. It's not a full tear, but it's the kind of thing that becomes a full tear if you keep loading it. She looked at Emily. How'd you catch this? He's not even limping. He's hiding it, Emily said. He's been trained to hide it. Reyes exhaled slowly. This dog should be on restricted activity. No impact work, no hard cutting, no long chases. She printed the images. You didn't get these from me, but you got them. Emily held the printouts like they were made of gold, because they were. This was the proof. This was the thing Dawson couldn't argue with. She should have gone straight to him, laid it on his desk, ended it. She didn't get the chance. Because when she and Tyler walked Ranger back toward the kennels, Dawson was standing in the middle of the yard and half the unit was standing behind him, and the look on his face told her everything. Someone had told him. Where, Dawson said very quietly, did you take my dog? The whole yard went silent, 4 days out, and the war had just gone public. I took him to the vet, Emily said. She didn't lie. She never would. I had his right hind scanned. Without my authorization. Without my knowledge. You took a military working dog out of my kennels behind my back. Dawson's voice was deadly calm, which was worse than shouting. Do you understand what you've done? You went around the chain of command on my base, with my dog. Yes, Emily said, I did, because you refused to look and someone had to. Tyler stepped forward. Sergeant, it was my... Don't. Dawson didn't even look at him. Don't you cover for her, Brooks. I know exactly whose idea this was. His eyes stayed locked on Emily. You've been here 3 days, and you've already got my own handlers sneaking dogs out behind my back. You've undermined me in front of my unit, and now you're going to stand there and tell me it was for the dog's own good. It was. It was for your ego. Dawson took a step toward her. You want to be the hero, the special one, the woman who saw what nobody else saw. You don't care about these dogs. You care about being right. And that was the moment. Emily could have fired back, could have thrown the vet images in his face, could have humiliated him in front of everyone the way he was trying to humiliate her. She didn't. Instead, she said something that stopped him cold. You want to know what I care about, Sergeant? I care about the fact that 4 months ago, you ran a shepherd named Shadow through a freeze scenario over and over until you broke him. And I watched his handler cry about it this morning because he's been carrying that guilt ever since. I care about the fact that Ranger has been walking on a bad leg for who knows how long, hiding it because you taught him that pain is failure. I care about the dogs. I've always cared about the dogs. The question is whether you do or whether you just care about being the man who never loses one. The silence after that was the loudest thing on the base. Dawson's face had gone white. Some of the handlers were looking at the ground now. Tyler was staring at Emily like she'd just walked into a burning building. And Dawson, for the first time, had nothing to say. He turned and walked away. And this time Emily saw it. His hands were shaking. She'd hit something real. She'd hit the exact wound she'd guessed at 2 days ago. And she felt no triumph because a wound that deep didn't heal from being hit. It just bled. That was 3.5 days out. And that night, everything got harder. Because Dawson didn't file a report. Emily kept waiting for it, the write-up, the reprimand, the official complaint that would end her time on the base. It never came. And that scared her more than a complaint would have because it meant Dawson wasn't going to fight her through the system. He was going to fight her through the dogs. The next morning, she found out how. She walked into the yard and found the whole training schedule rewritten. Ranger was back on the full board, building assaults, long chases. Everything Reyes had said would tear him apart. Emily went straight to Dawson. You saw the scans, she said. Tyler told me you asked Reyes and she showed you. You know that leg is compromised, and you put him back on impact work anyway. I put him back on the schedule, Dawson said, because he's my dog, and this is my unit, and in 3 days those inspectors are going to certify these animals, and my best dog is going to be in that evaluation, performing exactly the way he's trained to perform. He'll tear that leg. Then he'll tear it doing his job. Dawson looked at her. That's what a war dog does, Carter. He does the job until he can't. You want to turn him into a house pet who taps out when his knee hurts. I refuse. And there is nothing you can do about it because you have no authority here. None. You're a consultant, a guest. You can write all the reports you want. The dogs are mine. And the horrible thing was, he was right. On paper, she had no power. She couldn't order anything. She couldn't stop anything. She was there to advise, and he was free to ignore every word. She'd walked into a fight she had no formal weapons to win, but Emily Carter had learned a long time ago that formal weapons weren't the only kind. 2.5 days out, she changed tactics. She stopped trying to convince Dawson, and she started working the handlers. One by one, in the quiet moments at the coffee urn by the kennels at the end of the day, she talked to them. Not about theory, not about her methods. She just asked them about their dogs, what they'd noticed, what worried them, what they'd stopped letting themselves see. And it turned out they'd seen plenty. There was Rodriguez, whose Malinois had started refusing food before drills. There was Kim, whose shepherd had developed a tremor in one paw that nobody had reported because reporting it felt like admitting failure. There was a handler named Foster, the biggest, quietest man on the base, who pulled Emily aside one evening and said in a low voice, "My dog stopped wagging his tail 8 months ago. I never told anybody. I thought it was me. I thought I was a bad handler." And his eyes were wet when he said it. One by one, they came to her, not because she recruited them, because she'd given them permission to say the thing they had all been afraid to say. The dogs are hurting, and we can see it, and we hate it. By 2 days out, something had shifted on that base that Dawson couldn't see because it was happening in the spaces he didn't control. The handlers were talking to each other now, about their dogs, about what they'd noticed, and every conversation ended in the same quiet, dangerous place. Maybe she's right. Dawson felt it. He couldn't name it, but he felt the ground moving under him, the loyalty he'd taken for granted suddenly full of questions. And a proud man who feels his ground moving does one of two things. He listens or he digs in. Dawson dug in. 2 days out, he called a full unit assembly. Every handler, every dog. And he stood in front of all of them, and Emily understood that this was it. This was his answer to everything she'd been building all week. "I've heard the talk," Dawson said. "I know some of you have been listening to our consultant. I know some of you are wondering if 15 years of my methods have been wrong." He let that sit. "So let me remind you of something. Every dog in these kennels is alive because of how I train. Every handler in this unit is alive because their dog did its job without hesitation. I have never lost a dog on deployment. Never. Not one." His voice rose. "And I am not going to start now because a woman with a clipboard walked in here and told you your dogs have feelings." Nobody spoke. In 2 days, inspectors arrive, and we are going to show them the best K9 unit in the United States military. My dogs, my methods, my way. He looked around the assembly. Anybody who doesn't want to be part of that can request a transfer right now. No hard feelings. But this unit trains one way, my way. It was a strong speech. Emily had to give him that. It hit every note. Pride, fear, loyalty, legacy. And it almost worked. Then Foster, the big quiet man, spoke up from the back. "Sergeant, permission to ask a question." Dawson nodded. "You said you never lost a dog on deployment." Foster's voice was steady. "But that's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about the dogs we're losing right here, in these kennels. My dog stopped wagging his tail 8 months ago, Sergeant. He's not dead, but something in him is. And I don't think a healthy dog just stops wagging his tail." The silence after that was total. Dawson stared at Foster like he'd been slapped, because Foster wasn't some young handler. Foster was one of his most experienced men. Foster had been with him for years. And Foster had just said out loud in front of everyone the exact thing Emily had been saying all week. "That's enough, Foster," Dawson said quietly. "With respect, Sergeant, I don't think it is." Foster stepped forward. "I've followed you for 6 years. I'd follow you into anything. But I looked at my dog this morning, and I couldn't remember the last time he seemed happy, and that made me sick. So I'm asking, not as a challenge, as a handler who loves his dog, is it possible we've been getting something wrong?" And that was the twist that broke the day wide open. Because it wasn't Emily challenging Dawson anymore. It was his own people, his best people. The ones he'd built, the ones he trusted, standing up in front of everyone and asking the question he couldn't bear to hear. Dawson looked around the assembly, and he saw it in their faces. Not rebellion, something worse for him. Doubt, the same doubt he'd been fighting in himself for 6 days. He should have listened. That was the moment to listen. Instead, the fear won. "This assembly is over," Dawson said. "We train as scheduled. Ranger runs the full evaluation. That's final." And he walked out. Emily watched him go, and she didn't feel like she was winning. She felt like she was watching a man drown in something he refused to name. That night one day, and changed until the inspectors, she found Dawson alone at Ranger's kennel. She almost didn't approach him, but something told her to. He didn't turn around when she got close. He just kept looking at the dog through the fence. "You know what the worst part is?" Dawson said. He didn't sound angry anymore. He just sounded tired. "I heard Foster today, and I knew he was right. That's the part you don't understand about me, Carter. I'm not blind. I saw Ranger's leg the second Reyes showed me the scan. I've watched Shadow shut down. I know my dogs are carrying something." He shook his head. "I know." Emily stayed very still. "Then why?" "Because if you're right," Dawson said, and his voice cracked on the word, "then I've been hurting them. For years, all of them. Every dog I ever trained, every dog I was so proud of. If you're right, then I didn't build warriors. I built animals so scared of failing me that they'd rather tear their own bodies apart than stop." He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were wet. "You want to know who I lost? You've been circling it all week." "Fine, I'll tell you." Emily didn't move, didn't breathe. 11 years ago, deployment. My dog was named Atlas, best dog I ever had, and we were clearing a compound, and Atlas alerted, and I hesitated. I second-guessed him. I thought he was wrong because the intel said the building was clear. Dawson's voice was barely above a whisper now. It wasn't clear. And by the time I trusted my dog, it was too late. Atlas went in first the way he was trained to. And he didn't come out. He took what was meant for me. He died so I wouldn't. The whole story landed on Emily like a weight. And I swore, Dawson said, I swore on that dog's body that I would never again train an animal that could be second-guessed, that could hesitate, that could freeze at the wrong moment. I trained them so hard, so deep, that they'd do the job no matter what. Because Atlas did the job. And it killed him, and I couldn't stand the thought of ever again wondering if my dog was ready. And there it was, the whole engine of the man. 11 years of grief turned into 15 years of pressure. He hadn't been cruel. He'd been trying, and the only way he knew to make sure no dog he loved ever died because it wasn't ready. Michael, Emily said, and it was the first time she'd used his name. Atlas didn't die because he wasn't ready. He died because you hesitated. And you spent 11 years making sure the dogs would never hesitate when the one who hesitated was you. Dawson flinched like she'd struck him. You've been training these dogs to fix a mistake that was never theirs, Emily said gently. Atlas trusted you. He alerted, and he was right, and he trusted you enough to go in even after you doubted him. That's not a dog that needed more pressure. That's a dog that loved you. And you've spent 11 years making sure no dog ever gets the chance to love you like that again because it hurt too much to lose it. Dawson turned away from her. His shoulders were shaking. Indeed, the kennel ranger came to the fence, and the dog pressed his head against the chain link right next to where Dawson was standing and let out a low sound, almost a whine like he knew. Dawson looked at the dog, and slowly, like it cost him everything, he reached out and put his hand on Ranger's head through the fence. The dog leaned into it. And Sergeant Michael Dawson, 15 years a legend, the hardest man on the base, stood in the dark with his hand on a war dog and finally let himself grieve the one he'd lost. Emily stepped back quietly. This wasn't a moment for her. This was between a man and the ghost he had been carrying. She thought for one hopeful second that it was over, that he'd understood, that tomorrow he'd pull Ranger from the impact drills and the whole thing would be finished. She was wrong. Because grief is not the same as change, and a man can weep for what he's done and still be too afraid to do anything different. The next morning, the last morning before the inspectors, Emily came out to find the schedule unchanged. Ranger, full evaluation, building assaults, long chases, everything. She found Dawson in the yard and she couldn't believe it. After last night, after everything you told me, you're still going to run him. Dawson wouldn't meet her eyes. The inspectors expect a full evaluation. If I pull my best dog, they'll ask why. And if I tell them why, they'll question every dog in this unit, and the whole program comes under review, and everything I've built for 15 years gets torn apart. His jaw was tight. I can't do that. I won't. You'd rather tear his leg than admit you were wrong. I'd rather protect this unit. You'd rather protect yourself. Emily's voice rose for the first time all week. You cried over that dog last night. I watched you, and this morning you were going to send him out to hurt himself to save your reputation. Do you hear yourself? The evaluation is tomorrow, Dawson said. Ranger runs. That's an order to my handlers, and you can't override it. It's done, Carter. It's done. And he walked away. Emily stood in the empty yard, and for the first time all week, she felt something close to despair. She'd reached him. She'd actually reached him, the man behind the wall, and it hadn't been enough. The fear was still stronger than the truth. Tomorrow the inspectors would come. Tomorrow Ranger would be sent out on a leg that couldn't hold the run drills that would tear it to prove a point to a man who was too frightened to admit he already knew he was wrong, unless she stopped it. And there was only one way left to stop it now. Not through Dawson, not through the chain of command, not through reports or scans or quiet conversations. She was going to have to do something drastic. Something that could end her career. Something that would put her against the entire base in front of the very inspectors who'd come to judge them. She was going to have to physically stop Ranger from entering those drills. In front of everyone, in front of the brass, and take whatever came after. She found Tyler in the kennels that evening, and she told him what she was planning, and the young man went pale. They'll destroy you, he said. You interfere with a federal evaluation that will have you off this base by nightfall. Maybe worse. I know. Emily, you'll lose everything. I know that too. She looked at him steadily. But I looked at that dog on my first day and I made him a promise. And I don't break promises to dogs. They've had enough people break promises to them and Tyler stared at her, and then something settled in his face, a kind of a quiet resolve she hadn't seen before. Then you're not doing it alone, he said. If you go out there tomorrow and stop that dog I'm standing next to you, Foster too. I already talked to him. Half the handlers, Emily, they're with you. If Dawson wants to run that dog, he's going to have to go through all of us. And Emily Carter, who had walked onto that base 6 days ago with no allies and no authority, and a 110-pound war dog charging straight at her, felt her throat tighten. She'd come here alone. She wasn't alone anymore. But tomorrow the inspectors were coming. Tomorrow Dawson would try to run a wounded dog to save his pride. And tomorrow Emily Carter and a handful of handlers were going to stand in the middle of an official evaluation and refuse to let it happen, no matter what it cost them. She looked at Ranger one last time before she went to bed that night. The dog was lying down, favoring the leg, and when he saw her, he thumped his tail against the floor twice, trusting calm, believing that the woman who'd told him everything was okay would keep it okay. Tomorrow, buddy, she whispered to him, tomorrow we find out what all of this was for. And out in the dark, in his office, Sergeant Michael Dawson sat alone with a photograph of a dog named Atlas, and he did not sleep at all. The inspectors arrived at 8 in the morning. There were 3 of them, a senior evaluator named Colonel Hayes, a woman with 20 years of K-9 program oversight, and 2 junior officers with clipboards and stopwatches. They came in a plain government vehicle, and they didn't smile, and they didn't make small talk, and every handler on the base straightened up the second they saw them. Emily watched from the edge of the yard. She hadn't slept much. Neither had anyone else who knew what was coming. Dawson met the inspectors at the gate. He shook Colonel Hayes' hand, and he stood tall, and he gave them the tour of a man who was certain of everything. Emily watched him do it, and she thought about the way he'd wept at Ranger's kennel 2 nights ago, and she couldn't reconcile the 2 men. The one who grieved, the one who was about to send a wounded dog out to hide it from these very people. He looks confident, Tyler murmured beside her. He's terrified, Emily said. Well, that's what confident it looks like on a scared man. The evaluation schedule was posted. Detection first in the morning, then obedience and control, then the impact work in the afternoon. Building assaults, long chases, the drills that would tear Ranger's leg. Emily had until the afternoon. She'd hoped right up until that morning that Dawson would change his mind, that the sight of the inspectors, the reality of it, would knock something loose in him. But when the roster came out, Ranger's name was still on the full board. Detection, obedience, and the assault course. He was going through with it, which meant so was she. The detection phase started at 9, and this was where the first crack in Dawson's certainty appeared, though not the way anyone expected. The dogs worked one at a time. Search patterns sent discrimination, the careful work of finding what shouldn't be their turn, and the handlers who'd been quietly talking to Emily all week did something small but seismic. They ran their dogs differently, not softer, not weaker, just present. They stopped barking corrections. They stopped flooding the dogs with pressure. They let the animals think, and the dogs responded. Foster's shepherd, the one that hadn't wagged its tail in 8 months, worked a search pattern with a focus Foster hadn't seen in a year. Rodriguez's Malinois found a hide that the drill designers had buried deep enough to fool half the dogs on the base. Kim's shepherd Tremor, and all alerted, clean and confident on a scent the others had walked right past. Colonel Hayes noticed. Emily watched her notice. The colonel leaned over to one of her junior officers and said something, and the officer wrote it down. Then came Shadow. Tyler brought him out, and Emily's stomach clenched because this was the dog everyone had written off. The broken one. The grieving one. The one Dawson had run through a freeze scenario until something in him shut down. Easy, buddy, Tyler murmured to his dog. Just you and me, no pressure. Show me what you got. And Shadow, who 4 days ago wouldn't leave the back of his kennel, put his nose down and went to work. He was slow at first, careful. Emily could see the hesitation, the ghost of the trauma still in him. And she saw Dawson watching too, arms crossed, jaw tight, and she knew exactly what Dawson was thinking. He's going to fail. He's going to freeze in front of the inspectors and prove that a broken dog can't be fixed with kindness. Shadow reached the far end of the search area, and he stopped. Emily's heart stopped with him. For one horrible second, the dog just stood there frozen, and it was the freeze all over again, the thing that had broken him happening in front of the inspectors at the worst possible moment. Tyler didn't panic, he didn't correct. He crouched down at a distance, and he said very softly, "It's okay, Shadow, take your time. I've got you." And Shadow's ears came up. He took a breath, and then he moved to a container in the corner, the one everyone else had ignored, and he sat down beside it and looked back at Tyler with the clearest eyes he'd had in 4 months. An alert. Colonel Hayes walked over to the container. She checked her sheet, and she frowned. "There's nothing marked in this container," she said. "This is a blank. He's alerting on an empty box." The yard went quiet. Dawson stepped forward, and Emily saw the flash of something on his face, and to her horror was relief. Relief that Shadow had failed. Relief that the kindness had produced a false alert in front of the inspectors. "That's a false positive, Colonel," Dawson said. "The dog alerted on nothing. It's what happens when you let an animal work without proper structure. He second guesses. He alerts on ghosts." And that would have been the end of Shadow. The end of Tyler's faith. The proof Dawson needed. Except Emily was already walking forward. "Colonel Hayes," she said, "may I examine the container?" Hayes looked at her. "And you are a, Specialist Emily Carter, behavioral consultant assigned from headquarters." She kept her voice even. "Ma'am, before you mark that as a failure, I'd ask you to check the history of that specific container, what it was used for before today." Hayes studied her for a moment. Then she nodded at a junior officer. "Check it." The officer pulled the log, and his face changed. "Colonel," he said slowly, "this container was used in a training exercise 2 days ago. It held a live scent aid. It was cleaned and reassigned as a blank for today, but the scent's still in the material," Emily finished. "It's soaked into the container. There's nothing in there now. But there was, and that dog didn't alert on a ghost, Colonel. He detected a residual trace that a properly trained nose would catch and a pressured shutdown dog would miss entirely." She looked at Dawson. He wasn't wrong. He was more right than the test was. The silence that followed was different than the silence before. This one had a charge in it. Colonel Hayes crouched down and examined the container herself. She ran a gloved finger along the interior, and when she stood up, she looked at Shadow with something like respect. "The specialist is correct," Hayes said. "This is residual detection. The dog caught a trace the evaluation team missed." She made a note. "That's not a failure. That's exceptional scent work." Tyler let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for 4 months. In Shadow, sensing it, trotted back to his handler, and for the first time since anyone could remember, wagged his tail. It was a small thing, a dog wagging his tail. Foster, watching from the sidelines, wiped his eyes and didn't care who saw. And Dawson stood there, having just tried to condemn a dog for being right, and Emily looked at him, and she didn't say a word because she didn't have to. That was the first blow, and it landed in front of the one person whose opinion mattered most. But it wasn't over, not even close, because it was still morning, and the afternoon was still coming, and Ranger was still on the board for the impact drills. The obedience phase went well for everyone. Even Dawson's certainty seemed to steady during it because obedience was his home ground, the thing he drilled into these dogs 1,000 times, and they performed it flawlessly. But Emily watched Ranger the whole time, and she saw it. Every time the dog changed direction, every time he pushed off that right hind leg, there was a hitch. So small, so well hidden. But it was there, and it was getting worse because even the obedience work was loading the leg. By the time they broke for the midday meal, Emily knew that leg had maybe one hard drill left in it before it went. And the afternoon was full of hard drills. She caught Dawson alone during the break. "You saw what happened with Shadow," she said. "The colonel saw it. Your own methods almost cost that dog his certification, and my methods saved it. In front of the brass. You can't tell me you didn't feel that." "I felt a lucky break," Dawson said. But he didn't sound sure. "You felt the truth, and it scared you, so you're calling it luck." Emily stepped closer. "Michael, please. Don't run him this afternoon. You've already proven everything you needed to prove. The unit looks incredible. The colonel's impressed. You don't need Ranger on that assault course. Pull him. Say he's got a minor strain, restricted duty, nothing dramatic. Nobody will question it, and you'll have saved him." For a moment, one moment, she thought she had him. She saw it in his eyes, the war between the grief and the fear, the man who'd wept at the kennel and the man who couldn't admit he was wrong. And then a junior officer walked up and said, "Sergeant Dawson, Colonel Hayes wanted me to tell you she's particularly looking forward to seeing your top dog on the assault course this afternoon. She's heard a lot about his apprehension times. Says he might be the best she's evaluated in years." And Emily watched this door close, because now it wasn't just about Dawson's pride. Now the colonel was expecting Ranger. Now pulling him would raise exactly the questions Dawson was terrified of. Now the fear had reinforcements. "He runs," Dawson said quietly, not looking at her. "This afternoon, he runs." And he walked away to shake the colonel's hand. Emily stood there, and she felt the last door close, and she knew what she had to do. She found Tyler and Foster. "It's happening," she said. "This afternoon. He's running Ranger on the assault course. The colonel's expecting it, and Dawson won't back down." She took a breath. "I'm going to stop it. When they line Ranger up, I'm going to walk out onto that course, and I'm going to physically stop that dog from running. In front of the inspectors, in front of everyone." Foster's face was grim. "You know what that does to you?" "I know exactly what it does to me." "They'll pull your credentials," Foster said. "Interfering with a federal evaluation, disobeying the ranking officer on site, you could be looking at charges. Not just this base, your whole career." "I know, Foster." The big man looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Then I'm out there with you." "So am I," Tyler said. "No." Emily shook her head hard. "Absolutely not. This is my choice. I've got nothing here to lose. You two have careers, families, futures. You don't throw that away for me." "We're not throwing it away for you," Foster said. "We're throwing it away for the and if half the handlers on this base are willing to stand out there, the colonel can't write us all up. She can't fail an entire unit for protecting an injured animal. There's safety in numbers, Emily. Let us give you numbers." And Emily looked at these two men and at the handlers gathering behind them, Rodriguez and Kim and half a dozen others, all of them ready to walk out onto that course and put their careers on the line for a dog named Ranger. And she understood that whatever else happened today, she'd already changed something on this base that couldn't be changed back. "Okay," she said quietly, "together." The afternoon session began at 2. The assault course was the centerpiece of the whole evaluation. It was where the dogs proved they could do the real work, the apprehension, the pursuit, the controlled aggression under pressure. Colonel Hayes settled into her chair with her clipboard, and the two junior officers readied their stopwatches, and the first dogs ran. They ran clean. Rodriguez's Malinois, Kim's Shepherd. One after another the dogs performed, and the colonel made her notes, and the tension built because everyone who knew what was coming could feel the clock running down. Then the officer with the roster called the name. "Ranger, Handler Sergeant Dawson." And Dawson walked to the kennel to get his dog. This was the moment. Emily's heart was pounding. She looked at Tyler. She looked at Foster. She looked at the line of handlers who'd quietly positioned themselves near the edge of the course. And she started walking. Dawson clipped the lead onto Ranger and led him toward the start of the course. The dog walked beside him, and even now, even hurt Ranger's whole body was lit up with readiness, because this was the job, and the job was the only thing he'd ever been allowed to be proud of. And that was almost the worst part. Ranger wanted to run it. He didn't know his leg would betray him. He just knew that running the course was how you made your handler proud, and being proud of him was the closest thing to love Ranger had ever gotten from Dawson. Emily reached the edge of the course. "Sergeant Dawson," she said loud enough for the colonel to hear. "Stop." Everything stopped. Dawson turned. His face was a mix of fury and disbelief. "Carter, get off the course. I can't let you run him." Emily walked out to the middle of the course directly into Ranger's path. "His right hind is compromised. There's veterinary documentation. If he runs this course, that leg is going to fail, and it's going to fail at speed with the potential to injure not just the dog, but whoever's in the apprehension suit. I'm stopping this drill." Colonel Hayes stood up. "Specialist Carter, you are interfering with a certified federal evaluation. Step off the course immediately." "With respect, Colonel, I won't." Emily's voice was steady even as her heart hammered. "I have documentation that this dog is injured. I raised it through the chain. It was ignored. And I am not going to stand here and watch a wounded animal get run into the ground to protect a certification. If that costs me my credentials, then it costs me my credentials. But I'm not moving." And then Tyler stepped onto the course beside her. Neither am I. Foster stepped out. Or me. Rodriguez. Kim. One by one, the handlers walked out onto the course and stood beside Emily, forming a line between Ranger and the drill, and Colonel Hayes watched half of Dawson's unit place itself in open defiance of the ranking sergeant, and her face went very still. Dawson stared at his own handlers, at the men he'd built, at Foster's 6 years loyal standing against him. "What is this?" he said, and his voice was hoarse. "What are you doing?" "We're protecting the dog, Sergeant," Foster said quietly. "The way you taught us to protect them. The way you always said the dog comes first. Well, this is the dog coming first." And Emily watched that land on Dawson like a physical blow. Because it was his own creed turned back on him. The dog comes first. He'd said it 1,000 times, and now his own men were using it to stop him. Colonel Hayes looked at the line of handlers. She looked at Emily. She looked at Dawson. "Sergeant Dawson," she said, "is there veterinary documentation of an injury to this animal?" Dawson's jaw worked. This was the moment. He could lie. He could say no, order his handlers to stand down, force the issue, or he could tell the truth. And Emily watched the war inside him, and she prayed. Dawson stopped. He looked at Ranger, at the dog standing there tail up eager, trusting ready to tear his own leg apart to make his handler proud. And something in Dawson's face broke open. "There's a scan, Colonel, right hind, early stage tear. My consultant flagged it 4 days ago and His voice cracked. "I ignored it." The Colonel's eyebrows rose. "I ignored it," Dawson said again. And now he wasn't looking at the Colonel. He was looking at his dog, because I didn't want to admit she was right. Because if she was right about him, she was right about all of it, and I couldn't. He stopped. His hand tightened on the lead. I was going to run him hurt to protect my own pride. That's the truth of it. And my handlers just stood up to stop me, and they were right to. The whole yard was frozen. Colonel Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Sergeant, remove that dog from the course. Get him to the veterinary station. Now." Dawson knelt down beside Ranger, and the dog, sensing the shift, the drop in pressure, turned and pressed his head against Dawson's chest. And Dawson, in front of the inspectors, in front of his unit, in front of everyone, wrapped his arms around his dog and held on. "I'm sorry," he whispered into Ranger's fur, so quiet almost no one heard. "I'm so sorry, buddy. I've been getting it wrong, all of it. I'm sorry." Emily turned away because some moments aren't meant to be witnessed. The evaluation didn't end there, but everything after it happened in a different key. Colonel Hayes called a halt to the assault phase and requested a full accounting. She interviewed Emily. She interviewed the handlers. She reviewed the veterinary scans, the training logs, everything Emily had been documenting for 6 days. And slowly, methodically, the picture came together. Not a picture of a failing unit, a picture of a unit at a crossroads. "Walk me through it," Hayes said to Emily, the two of them alone in the office. "Your assessment, all of it." So Emily told her about Ranger hiding the injury, about Shadow shutting down after the freeze scenario, about Foster's dog that stopped wagging its tail, and Rodriguez's dog refusing food, and Kim's dog with a tremor no one reported. About a training philosophy built on so much pressure that the dogs would rather destroy themselves than fail. "And Sergeant Dawson," Hayes asked, "in your professional opinion, is he unfit to run this program?" And Emily surprised herself. "No," she said, "I don't think that at all." Hayes waited. "Dawson's methods came from somewhere real," Emily said. "He lost a dog on deployment 11 years ago, a dog that died taking a hit meant for him. And everything he's done since came out of a promise never to lose a dog like that again. He's not cruel, Colonel. He's grieving. He built a whole training philosophy around a wound he never healed." She leaned forward. "But here's the thing. Everything he knows about drive, about performance, about building a dog that will do the job under fire, that knowledge is real and it's valuable and it saves lives. He's not wrong about all of it. He's wrong about the balance. He forgot that a dog you can trust is stronger than a dog you can only control. If you pull him out of this program, you lose 15 years of genuine expertise. What he needs isn't removal. It's the other half of the equation, the part he's been too afraid to see." Hayes studied her for a long time. "You're advocating for the man who tried to run a wounded dog to spite you," she said, "who spent a week undermining you, who opened a kennel gate and let a war dog charge you on your first day. Yes, Emily said, because he's worth saving, same as the dogs. And the only reason I know that is because I watched him break down and cry over an animal 2 nights ago. A man who cries over his dog isn't beyond reach, Colonel. He's just scared. And I don't give up on the scared ones. Not the bugs and not the people either. Colonel Hayes was quiet for a long moment. That's the most unusual assessment I've heard in 20 years of doing this, she said finally. And there might have been the ghost of a smile on her face. Meanwhile, at the veterinary station, Dawson wouldn't leave Ranger's side. Reyes examined the leg again, confirmed the scan, and started the dog on a treatment and rest protocol. And Dawson stayed the whole time, his hand resting on the dog, and when Reyes finished, he asked her a question in a voice she'd never heard from him. Is he going to be okay? He caught it early, Reyes said. Thanks to your consultant. If it had gone through today's drills, we'd be looking at surgery, maybe the end of his working career. But this rest rehab, the right protocol, he'll be back. Better probably once he's not compensating for the pain. Dawson closed his eyes. You know what the strange part is? Reyes said gently. He didn't have to hide it this well. A dog only hides pain that thoroughly when he thinks showing it will disappoint someone. And Dawson understood finally and completely what he'd done. He'd built a dog so afraid of disappointing him that it would rather suffer in silence than admit it hurt. He'd wanted loyalty. He'd gotten fear wearing loyalty's face. Just like Emily said on the first day. Fear wearing a mask. And fear breaks. Sooner or later. It always breaks. He'd almost let it break on the worst possible day, in the worst possible way. That evening, after the inspectors had gone through their final review, Colonel Hayes gathered the unit. Emily stood at the back next to Tyler and Foster, and she genuinely didn't know what was coming. She'd interfered with a federal evaluation. So had half the handlers. By every rule in the book, there should be consequences. I've been evaluating K-9 units for 20 years, Colonel Hayes began. I've never seen a day like today. She looked around at the assembled handlers. This morning I watched a dog everyone had written off catch a residual trace my own team missed. This afternoon I watched half a unit walk onto an evaluation course and risk their careers to stop an injured animal from being run into the ground. And I watched a sergeant with 15 years of distinguished service stand in front of his people and admit he had been wrong. She let that sit. Now, I could write this up as a disciplinary catastrophe, insubordination, interference, a unit in disarray. She paused, but that's not what I saw. What I saw was a unit that cares more about its woes than about passing my test. And in my experience, that's the single most important quality a K-9 unit can have. You can teach technique. You can't teach that. Emily felt her chest loosen for the first time in a week. This unit is not certified today, Hayes continued, and a murmur went through the handlers. Not because you failed, because you're in transition, and I want to see where that transition goes. I'm recommending a 90-day review period, during which this unit will integrate the behavioral protocols your consultant has been documenting under her direct guidance alongside the operational training Sergeant Dawson provides. She looked at Dawson. Both of you, together, the drive and the trust. That's the unit I want to certify in 90 days. And based on what I saw today, I think you can build it. Then she turned to Emily. Specialist Carter, you disobeyed a direct order from the ranking officer on site. You interfered with a federal evaluation. A pause. You were also completely right, and you had the documentation to prove it, and you were willing to end your career to protect an animal that couldn't protect itself. I'm not going to pretend those things cancel out, but I know which one I care about more. The colonel almost smiled again. Don't make a habit of it, but well done. And that was when the handlers started to applaud. It started with Foster, and then Tyler, and then Rodriguez and Kim, and then all of them, the whole unit, the same men who 6 days ago had whispered about the behavioral specialist, who'd never faced real danger, now standing and applauding the woman who'd walked onto their course and refused to move. Emily stood there and took it, and her eyes stung, and she thought about her first day when nobody came to greet her, when she carried her own bag across an empty yard toward a base full of people who wanted her gone. She looked over at Dawson. He wasn't applauding, he was just looking at her. And when their eyes met, he gave her a single nod. Small, but it carried everything. The apology he couldn't say out loud. The respect he'd fought all week. The acknowledgement that she'd been right and that he was grateful and that something between them had permanently changed. She nodded back. Later, after the assembly broke up, Dawson found her by Ranger's kennel. The dog was resting, leg-wrapped, and he thumped his tail when he saw them both. For a while, neither of them said anything. They just stood there together looking at the dog. "I opened that gate on your first day to break you," Dawson said finally. "You know that. I wanted you to run. I wanted the unit to see you fail so they'd stop taking you seriously before you even started." "I know," Emily said. "And you stopped him with 2 words." Dawson shook his head slowly. "I've been trying to figure out all week how you did that, what the trick was. And I finally get it. There wasn't a trick. You just weren't afraid of him. And he could tell. That's the whole thing, isn't it? He's spent his whole life around people who were either afraid of him or using his fear against him. And you walked out there and told him everything was okay and meant it." His voice roughened. "Nobody ever told him that. Not once. Not even me." "You can tell him now," Emily said quietly. "You've got 90 days and a whole career after that. It's not too late, Michael. It's never too late to become the handler he always deserved." Dawson looked at his dog for a long moment. Then he knelt down slowly and put his hand on the fence, and Ranger came over and pressed against it. And Dawson said in careful, halting German the 2 words he'd heard Emily say on the first day. The words he'd spent a week refusing to understand. "Alles gut," he told his dog. "Everything is okay." And Ranger closed his eyes and leaned into the fence, into the hand of the man he'd spent 3 years trying so hard to please. And for the first time, the trying stopped because there was nothing left to prove. Emily stepped back quietly and let them have the moment. The man and the dog. The grief and the healing. 11 years of a wound that was finally starting to close. She'd come to this base to change a training program. She was starting to understand she'd been sent to change something much deeper than that. And as she walked back toward her quarters under the darkening sky, she knew the hardest part wasn't over. 90 days of integration. 2 philosophies that had spent a week at war now forced to become one. Handlers who'd have to unlearn habits carved over years. And a sergeant who'd have to rebuild not just his methods, but himself. But for the first time since she'd arrived, Emily Carter wasn't walking across that yard alone. Behind her, the whole unit was already talking about tomorrow. The 90 days began the next morning, and they did not begin smoothly. Emily had learned a long time ago that the hardest part of change wasn't the moment someone agreed to try. It was the second day, the 3rd, the 10th, the days when the old habits came roaring back and the new ways felt clumsy and slow and everyone secretly wondered if they'd made a mistake. And Dawson, for all his tears at the kennel, was still Dawson. She saw it on the very first morning of the review period. She came out to the yard to find him running the dogs through a drill, and his voice had that old edge to it, the sharp correction, the pressure, the tone that said failure is not permitted. It wasn't cruel, it was just habit. 15 years deep, and it came out of him the second he stopped thinking about it. Emily didn't call him out in front of the handlers. She waited until the drill ended. "Michael," she said quietly, "can I show you something?" He turned and she saw him brace because he thought she was about to lecture him. "I'm not going to correct you," she said, reading his face. "I want you to watch Ranger's replacement in the detection line, Rodriguez's Malinois. Watch how he works when Rodriguez keeps the pressure low. Just watch. Then tell me what you see." Dawson watched, and Emily watched him watch. The dog worked the line calm and methodical, and when he hit the target scent, he sat clean and looked back at his handler, and Rodriguez smiled and rewarded him, and the dog's whole body lit up with the simple joy of getting it right. "He's fast," Dawson admitted. "Faster than under pressure?" Dawson was quiet, because the answer was yes, and he knew it, and admitting it meant admitting something bigger. "When a dog's afraid of getting it wrong," Emily said, "part of his brain is always watching you instead of the work. He's split, half on the scent, half on you, waiting for the correction. But a dog that trusts you, all of him is on the work. That's why they're faster, Michael. Not because trust makes them soft, because trust makes them focused." Dawson didn't say anything, but that afternoon Emily noticed the edge had gone out of his voice. Just a little. He was trying. That was day 1. Day 4 brought the first real crisis, Shadow. The shepherd had been improving slowly under Tyler's care and Emily's guidance. He was eating again, playing again. The light Tyler had described was coming back into him piece by piece. But on day 4, they tried to reintroduce him to a building clearing exercise, the same kind of work that had broken him 4 months ago, and it went wrong. Shadow got to the doorway of the training structure, and he froze. Full freeze, legs locked, body low, the exact thing that had started all of it. And Tyler's face went white because he'd seen this before, and last time it had ended with Dawson running the dog through the trauma over and over until something in him shut down. "Emily," Tyler said, and his voice was tight with panic. "He's freezing. What do I do? Tell me what to do." And before Emily could answer, Dawson was there. Emily's heart stopped, because this was the test. This was the exact moment that had defined everything. 4 months ago, Dawson had responded to this freeze with force. And if he did it again now in front of everyone, it would undo every fragile inch of progress they'd made. But Dawson didn't reach for the leash. He didn't raise his voice. He crouched down a few feet from the frozen dog, and he said very softly, "Easy, Shadow. Easy, son. Nobody's going to make you do anything." Tyler stared at him. "Take him off it," Dawson said quietly. "Right now. Back him off. Don't push him through. Just take him somewhere calm and let him breathe." Tyler did. He led Shadow away from the doorway, and the dog came still shaking, and Tyler sat down with him in the shade and just held him. And Dawson stood there watching, and Emily saw his jaw working. "That's what I should have done 4 months ago," Dawson said. He wasn't talking to anyone in particular. He froze in that doorway, and I read it as defiance or weakness, and I ran him through it again and again to burn it out of him. I thought I was making him strong. His voice cracked. I was teaching him that the one time he was honest with me about being scared, I'd punish him for it until he learned to hide it. No wonder he shut down. I'd have shut down too. Emily put a hand on his shoulder. "You're doing it right now. That's what matters. It's too late for 4 months ago." "It's not too late for the next 4 months," Emily said. "Watch." She walked over to Tyler and Shadow, and she crouched down, and she looked at the dog, and she said gently, "You don't have to go in that building, buddy. Not today, not until you're ready. And when you are ready, you're going to go in on your terms, and nobody's ever going to force you through that door again. I promise you that." And Shadow, still trembling, lifted his head and looked at her, and something in his eyes settled. The freeze didn't get punished. For the first time in his life, the freeze got understood. And 3 days later, on day 7, Shadow walked into that building on his own. Slow, careful, Tyler right beside him, murmuring encouragement, no pressure at all. And the dog cleared the room and came out the other side, and when he did, he was wagging his tail so hard his whole back end swung with it. The handlers who'd gathered to watch let out a cheer. Foster was grinning. Tyler was openly crying and didn't care. And Dawson, standing at the back, watched the broken dog he'd nearly destroyed walk through the thing that had broken him, healed and whole and free. He turned away so no one would see his face. But Emily saw. She always saw. And she let him have it. The days moved faster after that. Word spread through the base and then beyond it. What was happening at the Naval Special Warfare K-9 program started to draw attention. Other handlers from other units started asking to observe. The story of the dog that caught the residual trace, the unit that stood up for an injured animal, the sergeant who'd rebuilt his entire philosophy at 50 years old. It traveled the way the best stories do, quietly and then all at once. But not everyone was happy about it. Around day 30, a new problem walked onto the base. A senior officer named Colonel Brennan from a different command who'd built his own reputation on the old methods and did not appreciate the noise coming out of Dawson's unit. He came to observe, and he came looking for reasons to shut the whole thing down. Emily knew the type. She'd faced a dozen of them. Brennan watched a full day of training, and at the end of it, he called a meeting, and he did not hide his contempt. "I've seen enough," Brennan said. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. You've got handlers coddling working paws, rewarding hesitation, backing dogs off drills the second they get uncomfortable. This isn't a K-9 program. It's a petting zoo." He looked at Dawson with open disappointment. "Dawson, you were the best in the business. And some consultant with a psychology degree walks in and turns you into this. I expected more from you." And Emily waited for Dawson to crumble. Because Brennan was hitting him exactly where he was weakest. His reputation, his legacy, the 15 years of pride he'd only just started to loosen his grip on. But Dawson didn't crumble. Colonel Brennan, Dawson said, and his voice was steady. 31 days ago, I'd have agreed with every word you just said. I'd have said the same thing about any unit that trained the way we train now. He paused, and I'd have been wrong. Brennan's eyebrows shot up. Let me ask you something, Dawson said. How many dogs have you had? Wash out, retire early. Breakdown. How many have you lost, not on deployment, but right there in the kennels, gone flat, gone cold, done before their time? Brennan didn't answer. I lost plenty, Dawson said. I just told myself it was normal, attrition. Some dogs don't have what it takes. That's what I said. For 15 years. His jaw tightened. But then somebody showed me that most of those dogs didn't wash out because they were weak. They washed out because I broke them. Because I trained them to be so afraid of failing that they'd rather destroy themselves than tell me they were struggling. And the ones who looked the strongest, the ones with the best numbers, the ones I was proudest of, those were the ones hiding the most pain. The room was silent. My best dog, Dawson said, was hiding a torn leg, running record apprehension times on an injury that should have had him on restricted duty because I taught him that pain was failure. And I almost ran him into a full assault course to protect my own reputation. I almost crippled the best dog I ever had to protect my pride. He looked at Brennan. So no, Colonel, this isn't a petting zoo. This is what it looks like when a handler finally stops being too scared to see what he's doing to his dogs. Brennan stared at him. You want to see whether it works? Dawson said. Don't take my word for it. Watch the drones, watch their times, watch their accuracy, and then go pull the records from before and compare. Because the numbers don't lie, Colonel, and the numbers are better now. Every single metric. Detection accuracy up, apprehension control up, handler injuries down, washout rate down to almost nothing. You want data, I've got 90 days of it, and it says the same thing my consultant said on her first day. And that was the twist that turned the whole confrontation. Because Brennan had come expecting to find soft dogs and coddling handlers, and instead he found a legend of the old school defending the new one with cold hard numbers, and Brennan was a numbers man underneath all his contempt. He asked to see the data. Emily brought it out, all of it. The detection accuracy graphs, the apprehension times, the injury logs, the washout comparisons. 90 days of proof laid out clean and undeniable. Brennan went through it all in silence, and when he finished, he was quiet for a long time. These times, he said finally, this accuracy, this is better than my unit. Yes, sir, Dawson said. It is. Brennan looked at the data. Then he looked at the eyes working out in the yard, the punches that were fast and confident and clean and above all, happy in their work. And something shifted in the hard old officer's face. How long did it take you to accept this? He asked Dawson. Too long, Dawson said. I fought it every step of the way. I opened a kennel gate on my consultant's first day and let my most aggressive dog charge her, hoping she'd fail. She stopped him with 2 words instead. He almost smiled. I've been catching up to her ever since. Brennan looked at Emily for the first time with something other than contempt. 2 words, he said. Alles gut, Emily said. Everything's okay. It's amazing how far that goes. With a dog, or with a man who's been carrying something heavy for a long time. Brennan held her gaze for a moment, then he gathered up the data. I'd like copies of this, he said, for my own unit. He paused, and it clearly cost him something to say the next part. It seems I have some records of my own to go pull, and some dogs I owe a second look. And he left not as an enemy, but as a man who'd just seen something he couldn't unsee. Emily watched him go, and she thought about how the whole thing had started one hostile officer coming to shut them down now, leaving as a convert. The same way it had started with Dawson. The same way it always started. Not with agreement, with proof and with the willingness to look. Day 60 brought the biggest test of all. Ranger. The dog's leg had healed, Reyes had cleared him slowly through weeks of rehab, and now the question was whether Ranger could come back to full work. And there was a deeper question underneath it, one that mattered more to Dawson than any evaluation. Could a dog trained on fear learn to work on trust? Or was Ranger too far gone, too shaped by 3 years of pressure to ever change? Dawson didn't want to find out in front of anyone. He asked Emily to be there, just the 2 of them, when he brought Ranger back to the work. They started small, basic detection, and Ranger, who'd once been the fastest and most aggressive dog on the base, was different now. He worked the line, but he kept checking in with Dawson, and every time he did, Emily watched Dawson's face, waiting to see if he'd slip back into the old pressure, the old corrections. He didn't. Good boy, Dawson said, low and warm when Ranger hit the target. That's it? Good boy. And Ranger's tail came up, and he did the thing that Emily had never seen him do in his old life. He got excited. Not the frantic, driven, desperate, to-please energy of before. Real joy. The pure, uncomplicated happiness of a dog doing a job he loved with a handler he trusted. Dawson knelt down and Ranger bowled into him, and the big war dog, the one everyone had feared, licked his handler's face like a puppy. Dawson laughed. Emily had never heard him laugh before. He's happy, Dawson said, and his voice was thick. Emily, he's actually happy. In 3 years, I never once saw him happy. I saw him perform. I saw him drive. I saw him win. But I never saw him happy. He held his dog. I thought those were the same thing, performance and happiness. I thought a dog that performed was a dog that was fine. And he was suffering the whole time, and I couldn't see it because I didn't want to. You see it now, Emily said gently. I see it now. Dawson buried his face in Ranger's fur. I got 11 years back today. That's what this is. Every dog I trained wrong, every one I broke, I can't fix them all. Some of them are gone, retired, washed out, passed on. I can't reach them anymore. His voice cracked. But this one I get to make right, and that's more than I deserve. Emily crouched down beside him. That's not how it works, Michael. You don't get what you deserve. You get what you're willing to do next. And what you're doing next is right. That's what matters. Not the ledger of the past, the choice in front of you. Dawson looked at her, this hard man who tried to break her on her first day, now kneeling in the dirt with his healed dog, transformed in ways he was only beginning to understand. Why'd you fight so hard for me? He asked suddenly. The handlers I get, the dogs I get. But me, I was your enemy. I did everything I could to see you fail. When Colonel Hayes asked if I should be pulled from the program, you could have ended my career with one word. Why'd you save me? Emily was quiet for a moment. Because I've done this a long time, she said. And I've learned to tell the difference between a cruel man and a hurting one. Cruel men enjoy the pressure. They like the control for its own sake. But you, every time one of these dogs improved, I watched your face. And underneath all that anger, there was this look. Like a man who wanted so badly for it not to be true, because if it was true, it meant he'd been hurting the things he loved most. That's not a cruel man, Michael. That's a man in pain. And I don't give up on the ones in pain. She smiled slightly. The dogs taught me that, same as they taught you these last 90 days. Dawson looked at her for a long moment, and then he said something that Emily hadn't expected. Thank you, he said, for not letting me be the man I was becoming. And Emily understood that this right here was the real work, not the dogs. The dogs had always been the easy part. The hard part was the people. The wounded, defensive, terrified people who'd built walls so high they couldn't see over them anymore. Reaching them was slower, harder, and infinitely more important. Because a healed handler healed every dog that came after. A broken one broke them. She'd come to fix a training program. She'd stayed to fix the man running it. And in fixing him, she'd fixed everything downstream, every dog he'd ever trained from now until the end of his career. Day 89. The day before Colonel Hayes was scheduled to return for the final review. The unit gathered in the evening informally the way they'd started doing over the last 3 months. Somewhere along the way, this group of men who'd once whispered about the behavioral specialist had become something else. A team, a family almost. And Emily had become the center of it, though she'd never asked to be. Foster's dog wagged its tail constantly now. Kim's shepherd's tremor had faded to almost nothing once the stress came off it. Rodriguez's Malinois ate before drills every time without fail. And Shadow the broken one, the one everyone had written off, was arguably the best detection dog in the unit. They'd done it. In 90 days, they'd rebuilt not just a training program, but a whole way of understanding the animals they worked with. And Emily, watching them, felt something she didn't often let herself feel. Pride. Not in herself, in them. In the men who'd been willing to unlearn everything, in the Moz who'd found their way back, in the sergeant who'd torn down 15 years of himself and built something better in its place. You're leaving, Tyler said, coming to stand beside her. It wasn't a question. After the review, Emily said, my job here is done. There are other units, other dogs, other handlers who need what you all needed. They won't be as smart as us, Tyler said, and Emily laughed. No, she agreed. Probably not. Tyler was quiet for a moment. You changed my life, you know. I was going to quit before you came. After what happened with Shadow, I couldn't look at myself. I figured I wasn't cut out for this, that I'd broken my dog, and I didn't deserve to have one. I'd already started the paperwork to transfer out. He looked at her. And then you showed up and told me Shadow wasn't broken. And you were right. And now I've got the best dog on the base and a whole career ahead of me, and it's because you sat down across from me in the mess hall on your first night and asked me about my dog. His voice roughened. Nobody had asked me about my dog in months. Everybody just asked about his numbers. You asked about him. Emily felt her throat tighten. That's the whole thing, Tyler, she said. That's everything I came here to teach. Ask about the dog. Not the numbers, the dog. Do that and everything else follows. Across the yard, Dawson was working with Ranger in the fading light, the two of them moving together like they'd never known any other way to be. And Emily watched them, the handler and the war dog. Both of them healed, both of them free, and she thought about her first day when Dawson had opened that gate and let Ranger charge her, hoping she'd break. She hadn't broken, and in not breaking, she'd given all of them permission not to break either. The final review came the next morning. Colonel Hayes arrived and she spent the whole day watching. She watched the detection work and the obedience and the controlled apprehension. She watched Shadow clear buildings and Ranger work with joy and Foster's dog wag its tail through every drill. She watched handlers who trusted their dogs and dogs who trusted their handlers, and a unit that had become in 90 days something Emily suspected the colonel had never quite seen before. And at the end of the day, Hayes gathered them. 90 days ago, she said, I told you I wanted to certify a unit that combined the drive and the trust, the operational excellence and the behavioral understanding. I told you I thought you could build it. She looked around at them. I was wrong. A ripple of alarm went through the handlers. I didn't think you could build it, Hayes continued. Not really. I've been doing this 20 years and I've seen 100 units promise to change and maybe 2 actually do it. I gave you 90 days mostly because I couldn't bring myself to shut down a unit that cared as much as you did. She paused. But I have never in 20 years seen a transformation like this one. Your metrics aren't just improved, they're the best I've evaluated. And your dogs aren't just performing, they're thriving. I've watched working dogs my whole career, and I have rarely seen animals this capable and this happy at the same time. She let that sit. This unit is certified, she said. Not just certified, I'm recommending it as a model program. I want other units studying what you've done here. I want your protocols documented and distributed. And I want Specialist Carter's methods integrated into K9 training across the command. She looked at Emily. You've changed how I think about this work, and I don't say that lightly. The applause that followed was different from the applause on evaluation day 90 days ago. That had been gratitude relief, the raw emotion of a crisis survived. This was something quieter and deeper. This was a unit that knew exactly what it had accomplished and knew exactly who had made it possible. Emily stood there and took it, and this time she didn't fight the tears. She looked at Dawson. And Dawson, the man who tried to break her on her first day, was applauding louder than anyone. And when their eyes met, he didn't just nod this time. He mouthed 2 words, the same 2 words that had started everything, the words she'd whispered to a charging war dog on a hot afternoon 3 months ago, the words he'd finally learned to understand. Alice Gut, everything's okay. And it was. For the first time in a very long time for the dogs and for the handlers, and for the broken man who'd found his way back, everything really was okay. That evening before she left, Emily made one last trip to Ranger's kennel. The dog came to the fence when he saw her tail wagging, and she crouched down and put her hand through the chain link and rested it on his neck, the same way she had on her first day when he was still a stranger, still coiled and afraid, still hiding a pain that no one had bothered to see. Look at you, she murmured to him. Look how far you've come, buddy. Ranger leaned into her hand. You did that, Emily said. Not me. Everybody thinks I fixed you. I didn't fix you. I just told you it was safe to stop being afraid. You did the rest, you and Michael. You found your way back to each other. That was always yours to do. Behind her footsteps. I figured I'd find you here, Dawson said. Emily didn't turn around. Saying goodbye. To the day or to me? Both. She stood up. You're going to be all right, Michael. You and this whole unit. You don't need me anymore. That's the goal, you know. To make yourself unnecessary, to leave people better than you found them so they can carry it on without you. Dawson was quiet for a moment. The men wanted me to tell you something. Before you go, he cleared his throat, and Emily could tell this was hard for him, this man who had spent 15 years never saying a soft word. They said, and I'm quoting Foster here, that you're the best thing that ever happened to this base. And that if you ever need anything, anytime, anywhere, you've got a whole unit of handlers who will drop everything and come. He paused, and I told them to add that the sergeant said the same thing, and that he's sorry for the first day, for all of it. Emily turned around then, and she looked at this man transformed almost beyond recognition from the one who'd refused to shake her hand 3 months ago, and she smiled. You already told me you're sorry, Michael. About 100 times in about 100 ways. You don't have to keep saying it. I heard you the first time. I know, Dawson said, but I figure a man who spent 15 years not saying it owes a few extra. Emily laughed, and Dawson laughed too, and Ranger, sensing the warmth between the two humans he trusted most, thumped his tail against the ground and looked up at both of them with pure, uncomplicated love. They stood there for a while, the three of them, in the quiet of the evening, and none of them said anything, because there was nothing left that needed saying. Emily Carter had walked onto that base as the woman nobody expected, the outsider, the consultant they'd whispered about, the one they'd been so sure would break. She was leaving as something none of them would ever forget. And out in the kennels, the dogs slept easy without fear, and the men who cared for them slept easy too, because a woman with no rank and no army and nothing but the truth had walked into the middle of them and reminded them all of something they'd forgotten. That the strongest bond isn't built on control, it's built on trust. And that sometimes the two quietest words in the world can change everything. Alice got everything's okay. Emily Carter left the base the next morning, and she was certain she'd never see most of those men again. That was the nature of her work. She changed what needed changing, and she moved on to the next unit that was quietly falling apart. She'd made peace with that a long time ago. You don't get to stay for the harvest when your whole job is planting seeds in ground that isn't yours. But 6 months later, a phone call reached her at a base in North Carolina where she was 3 weeks into fixing a K-9 unit that had never heard of trust. It was Dawson. Emily, his voice sounded strange, tight. I need you to come back. She felt her stomach drop. What happened? Is it Ranger? Is he hurt? No, Ranger's fine. Ranger's better than fine. Dawson paused. It's not a crisis, it's the opposite. Something's happening here and I need you to see it. I can't explain it over the phone. Can you come just for a day? I know you're busy. And something in his voice, some quality she'd never heard from him before, made her say yes. She flew back to San Diego 3 days later, and Dawson met her at the gate. But this time it was different. This time he was smiling before she even got out of the car, and this time he wasn't alone. Half the unit was there. Foster, Tyler, Rodriguez, Kim, all of them waiting for her, and when she stepped out, they actually cheered, and Emily stood there completely overwhelmed. What is all this? She managed. You'll see, Dawson said. Come on. There's something I have to show you. He led her not to the kennels, but to a building she didn't recognize, a new structure that hadn't been there 6 months ago. And on the door was a sign, and the sign made her stop dead in her tracks. The Carter Method Training Facility. Michael, she said slowly, what is this? After you left, Dawson said Colonel Hayes did exactly what she promised. She recommended your protocols across the command, and it caught fire, Emily, faster than anybody expected. Units all over the country started asking about it, and the command needed a place to train the trainers. He gestured at the building. So they built one, here, and they named it after you, because this is where it started. This is where a consultant nobody wanted stopped a war dog with 2 words and changed everything. Emily stared at the sign and she couldn't speak. That's not even the part I called you about, Dawson said. Come inside. Inside the building, there was a classroom, and the classroom was full. Not just handlers from Dawson's unit, handlers from other units, other bases, other branches. 30, maybe 40 of them, all of them there to learn a way of working with dogs that 6 months ago, almost nobody had believed in. And at the front of the room teaching them was Sergeant Michael Dawson. Emily stood in the doorway and watched. She watched the man who'd opened a kennel gate to break her on her first day, now standing in front of a room full of strangers, teaching them in his own words why trust made a stronger dog than fear ever could. The best dog I ever had, Dawson was saying to the room, not seeing her yet, was hiding a torn leg from me, ran record times on an injury that should have benched him. You know why? Because I trained him to believe that pain was failure and failure was unforgivable. I built a dog so afraid of disappointing me that he'd rather cripple himself than tell me he hurt. He paused. That's not strength. That's what I used to call strength back when I didn't know any better. Real strength is a dog that trusts you enough to be honest with you. A dog that can look at you and say, I'm hurting, and know you'll listen. That's the dog that comes home. That's the dog that saves your life. Not because he's afraid of you, because he trusts you. And Emily, standing in the back of the room, felt tears sliding down her face, because this was the twist she'd never seen coming. She'd thought her legacy would be a training method, a set of protocols, a better way to work with dogs. But her real legacy was standing at the front of that room. It was Dawson. The hardest case she'd ever worked, the man who'd fought her every step of the way, now the most passionate advocate for everything she believed. She hadn't just changed him, she'd turned him into a teacher. And a teacher reaches hundreds. A teacher reaches thousands. A teacher outlives you. Dawson looked up and saw her, and he stopped mid-sentence. And here she is, he said quietly to the room. The woman who taught me all of it. Specialist Emily Carter. The person this building is named after. Stand up, everybody. This is the one who started it. And 40 handlers rose to their feet and turned to look at her, and the applause that filled that room was the sound of something Emily had spent her whole career hoping for and never quite believing she'd get to see. Her work living on, in other people's hands, spreading beyond anything she could have done alone. She'd made herself unnecessary, and in doing so, she'd made herself immortal. After the class, Dawson took her out to the kennels, and Ranger came bounding to the fence, healthy and whole, and radiating that pure joy that had been buried under 3 years of fear. And he wasn't the only one who'd changed. Watch this, Dawson said. He opened Ranger's kennel and the dog came out, and Dawson didn't clip a leash on him. He just walked, and Ranger walked beside him, checking in calm and happy, and completely under control without a single point of pressure. He's off leash, Emily said. He's off leash, Dawson confirmed. The most aggressive dog on the base 6 months ago. Now I trust him off leash around civilians. Around children, Emily. He did a demonstration at an elementary school last month. 40 kids petting the war dog who used to want to take my arm off. His voice caught. And you know what? He loved it. He soaked it up. That whole time he was aggressive, he wasn't a mean dog. He was a scared dog who never got to be anything else, and now he gets to be who he actually is. Emily crouched down and Ranger came to her, and she buried her hands in his fur, and the dog pressed against her like he remembered, like some part of him knew that this was the woman who told him on the worst day of his old life that everything was okay. He remembers you, Dawson said softly. Dogs always remember the ones who were kind to them, Emily said. That's the thing people never understand. They think dogs forget. They don't. They remember every single person who was gentle when they didn't have to be. It's written into them. She looked up at Dawson. It's why the work matters so much. Because a dog carries every kindness and every cruelty for its whole life, and you get to decide which one it carries the most of. Dawson knelt down beside her and put his hand on his dog next to hers. I carry it too, he said. Every dog I broke before I knew better. I still think about them. The ones that washed out, the ones I sent away because I thought they were weak. I know now they weren't weak. I know now I failed them. His jaw tightened. That's the part I can't shake, Emily. All those dogs, 11 years of them, I can't go back and fix a single one. And this was where the story could have stayed heavy, where it could have sunk into the weight of everything Dawson had done wrong. But Emily wasn't going to let it end there. Michael, she said, look at me. He looked at her. Every one of those dogs you're grieving, she said, you're honoring right now. Every handler in that classroom is going to train dogs the right way because of what you learned the hard way. Do the math. You broke, what, a few dozen dogs over 11 years. Those 40 people in that room are each going to train dozens more over their careers, and they're going to do it right because you taught them. That's hundreds of dogs, thousands over time, thousands of dogs who will never be broken because you were willing to stand up and say, I got it wrong. Learn from my mistake. She held his gaze. You don't get to unbreak the dogs you broke, but you get to make sure it never happens to thousands who come after. That's not nothing, Michael. That's everything. That's the most anyone can do with a mistake. Turn it into a lesson that saves others. Dawson was quiet for a long moment, and then he nodded slowly, and Emily watched some piece of the 11-year weight finally lift off him. You always know exactly what to say, he said. I've had a lot of practice, Emily said, with biosimilars and with handlers. Turns out they need the same thing. Somebody to tell them the truth and then tell them it's going to be okay. There was a shift in Dawson, then something he'd clearly been building up to the whole visit. There's something else, he said. The real reason I asked you to come. The classroom, the building, that's all wonderful, but that's not it. He stood up. Tyler wants to talk to you, and so does Foster, and honestly, so does the whole unit. We've been talking for months, and we've got a proposal, and we need you to hear it in person. Emily frowned. A proposal for what? Come find out. The whole unit gathered in the classroom after the visiting handlers had left. Emily sat at the front, and the men she'd worked with 6 months ago sat facing her, and there was an energy in the room she couldn't quite read. Tyler stood up first. Ma'am, he said. Emily, we've been thinking about this for a long time, and we know you've got a job. We know you travel all over fixing units doing what you did for us, and we know that work matters. He took a breath. But we've watched you leave one base after another. You plant the seed and you move on. You never get to stay and see what grows. And we think that's a shame, because you deserve to see what grows, Emily. You deserve to have one place that's yours. Emily's chest tightened. Tyler, let me finish. He glanced at Dawson, who nodded. The command wants the Carter Method facility to be a permanent program, a real training center, turning out handlers who'll spread this everywhere, and they need someone to run it. Someone who knows it inside and out. Someone who lives it. He looked at her. We want it to be you. We want you to stay, to run the place named after you, to stop planting and moving on and finally get to build something that lasts right here with us. The room was silent. Emily looked around at them. At Tyler, who'd almost quit before she came. At Foster, whose dog wagged its tail now. At Rodriguez and Kim and all the others. At Dawson, the man she'd saved from himself, watching her with an expression full of hope. And she felt something she rarely let herself feel. She felt the pull of belonging. I've never stayed anywhere, she said quietly. My whole career, I go where I'm needed and I leave when the job's done. That's who I am. That's how I've always done it. Maybe it's time to be needed in one place, Dawson said. You spent your whole life reaching people and dogs and then walking away before you got to see them healed. You gave that gift to everyone but yourself. Maybe you deserve to stay long enough to watch something grow, to have a home, to have a family. He gestured at the room. You've already got one, Emily. We're right here. We've been here for 6 months hoping you'd come back. You just have to say yes. And Emily Carter, the woman nobody had wanted, the outsider who'd carried her own bag across an empty yard on her first day, sat in a building named after her, surrounded by men who'd once whispered about her and now called her family, and she felt something break open in her chest that she'd kept locked for a very long time. Because the truth was, she'd been running her whole life, not from anything, toward the next unit, the next dog, the next crisis, always moving, always the outsider, always the one who left before anyone could ask her to stay, and nobody had ever asked her to stay before. I need to think about it, she said, and her voice wasn't quite steady. Take all the time you want, Dawson said gently. The offer's not going anywhere, and neither are we. That night, Emily walked the base alone, past the kennels where the dogs slept easy without fear, past the classroom with her name on the door, past the training yard where 6 months ago a war dog had charged her, and she'd stopped him with 2 words. She thought about her whole career, all the units, all the dogs, all the handlers she'd reached and then left behind. And she realized, standing there in the dark, that Dawson was right about something. She'd spent her entire life giving other people permission to heal, to trust, to stop being afraid. and she'd never once given it to herself. She'd told 100 handlers to stop running from their pain, and she'd been running from her own the whole time, running from the risk of belonging, running from the possibility of loss. Because if you never stay anywhere, you never lose anything. And if you never lose anything, you never have to feel the way Dawson felt about Atlas, the way he'd felt for 11 years. She'd built her whole life around never having to grieve, and that she understood now was its own kind of cage. She stood outside Ranger's kennel for a long time, and the dog woke up and came to the fence, and Emily reached through and put her hand on him. "What do you think, buddy?" she whispered. "Should I stay?" Ranger leaned into her hand and let out a soft sound, almost a sigh, and pressed his head against the chain link. And Emily laughed quietly in the dark. "Yeah," she said. "That's what I thought too." She found Dawson the next morning. "I have a condition," she said. Dawson's face lit up because he heard what that meant. "Name it. I'll run the facility. I'll stay, but I don't run it alone." She looked at him. "You run it with me. The drive and the trust, remember, that's what Colonel Hayes wanted. That's what makes it work. Your operational knowledge and my behavioral work. Neither one is complete without the other, so it's both of us, co-directors, or nothing." Dawson stared at her. "Emily," he said slowly, "I opened a kennel gate on your first day and let a war dog charge you. I spent a week trying to end your career. I almost crippled my own dog to spite you. And you want me to run this place with you?" "Yes," Emily said, "because you're the proof, Michael. You're the whole proof. Every handler who walks through that door is going to doubt this works. They're going to think trust makes soft dogs. And then they're going to meet you, the hardest, most old school, most decorated K-9 sergeant in the command. And you're going to tell them that you thought exactly the same thing until it almost cost you everything. There's no better teacher than a man who fought the truth and lost. You reach people I can't reach. The skeptics, the tough ones, the ones like you were. They won't listen to me, but they'll listen to you." She smiled. "So it's both of us, partners. That's the deal." Dawson was quiet for a long moment, and then he did something Emily had never seen him do. He extended his hand, the same gesture he'd refused on her first day. "Partners," he said, and Emily took his hand and shook it, and the circle closed. 6 months and a whole transformation from the moment he'd left her hand hanging in the air like she wasn't worth the courtesy. "Welcome home, Emily," Dawson said. And for the first time in her life, the word home didn't feel like something that belonged to other people. The years that followed proved everything. The Carter Method facility became one of the most respected K-9 training programs in the country. Handlers came from every branch, every unit, and they left transformed, carrying the method back to their own dogs, their own bases, their own careers. And every one of them, without exception, remembered the 2 directors who ran it. The behavioral specialist with the impossible gift for reaching frightened animals, and the grizzled old sergeant who taught them in his own hard-earned words that he'd been wrong for 15 years and it had taken a woman with no rank and 2 words of German to show him the truth. Tyler Brooks became an instructor at the facility. Shadow the dog everyone had written off lived out a long and happy career and became something of a legend. The broken dog who came back, and Tyler told his story to every new class as proof that no dog was ever truly beyond reach. Foster made instructor too. His dog, the one that had stopped wagging its tail for 8 months, wagged it until the very end. And Ranger. Ranger became the face of the whole program. The war dog who'd charged a woman on a hot afternoon and been stopped by 2 whispered words. Every visitor wanted to meet him. Every class heard his story. And Ranger, off-leash and joyful and completely healed, greeted them all with the pure open love of a dog who'd finally been allowed to be exactly who he was. He and Dawson were inseparable until the very end of Ranger's life years later. And when that day came, when the great dog finally grew old and tired, and it was time, Dawson stayed with him through all of it, his hand on his dog the whole way. And the last thing Ranger heard was the 2 words Dawson had learned from Emily, spoken soft and steady and full of love. "Alice Gut, buddy. Everything's okay." And it was, because Ranger had lived a life that ended in trust instead of fear, and there is no greater gift you can give a dog than that. Dawson wept for days, but it was a different grief than the one he'd carried for Atlas all those years. Atlas had been grief tangled up with guilt, with a hesitation he could never take back, with a wound that had festered into 15 years of hurting the dogs he loved. Ranger's grief was clean. It was the grief of a life well loved and well lived and fully honored. It was the grief you're supposed to feel. And Emily sat with him through it, and she told him what he'd once needed someone to tell him. This is what it's supposed to feel like, Michael, she said. This is grief without guilt. You did everything right by him. Everything. He knew he was loved every single day at the end. That's why it hurts this much. Because you actually let yourself love him. And that's not a wound, that's a gift. The hurt is just the price of the gift. And it's worth it. It's always worth it. And Dawson, who'd spent 11 years trying to never love a dog again, so he'd never have to feel this, understood finally that the feeling was the point. That the alternative, the armor, the distance, the fear had cost him far more than any grief ever could. He got another dog after that, a young Malinois, wild and full of drive, and he raised her the right way from the very first day on trust instead of fear. And she became the best dog he ever had. Better even than Atlas, better even than Ranger, because for the first time in his whole career, Dawson knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it with a full and open heart. He named her Emily. Emily Carter herself never left. She ran the facility for the rest of her career, and she watched something she'd never let herself have before. She watched things grow. She watched handlers she'd trained go on to train others, watched the methods spread across the country, and then beyond, it watched a whole generation of working dogs live better lives because of a truth she'd spent her whole career trying to teach. And she watched a family form around her. The men who'd once whispered about her became the people who filled her life. Tyler's kids called her Aunt Em. Foster never made a major decision without asking her opinion. And Dawson, the man who'd tried to break her on her first day, became her closest friend in the world, the two of them running that facility side by side, the drive and the trust, exactly as it was always meant to be. Years later, a young handler at the facility, fresh and skeptical, and sure she knew better than all these old methods, asked Emily the question that new handlers always asked eventually. Is it true, the young woman said, the story, that you stopped an aggressive war dog on your first day with just 2 words that can't be real? That's just a legend they tell to new people, right? And Emily smiled the way she always did when someone asked. It's real, she said, but everybody gets the story wrong. They think the point of it is that I did something impossible, that I had some magic gift, some special power, that I walked out there and dominated that dog with 2 words. She shook her head. That's not what happened. That's not the lesson at all. Then what's the lesson? Emily thought about it the way she always did because it mattered to get it right. That dog charged me because everyone in his life had either been afraid of him or used his fear against him, she said. He came at me expecting a fight because a fight was the only thing anyone had ever given him. And I didn't fight him, I didn't dominate him, I didn't outmuscle him or out-yell him or force him to submit. I just stood still and I looked at him and I told him the truth. I told him everything was okay. And it was the first time in his life anyone had ever said that to him and meant it. The young handler was quiet. The lesson isn't that I stopped him, Emily said. The lesson is that he was never really trying to attack me. He was trying to survive the only way he knew how. And the second someone offered him another option, the second someone offered him trust instead of fear, he took it instantly, because that's what he wanted the whole time. That's what they all want. Every dog, every person, every scared, defensive, aggressive creature that ever bared its teeth at the world. She looked at the young handler. They're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to protect themselves from being hurt. And the moment you show them they don't have to, everything changes. That's the whole method. That's the whole thing. It was never about controlling the dog. It was about understanding him. The young handler looked at her for a long time. That's not just about dogs, is it? She said finally. And Emily smiled because that was the moment she knew the young woman was going to be a great handler, because she'd understood the thing that took most people years to understand. No, Emily said, it was never just about dogs. Emily Carter did not become famous. Her name never made the news. Outside the world of military working dogs, almost no one ever knew what she'd done. She lived a quiet life, doing quiet work, changing quiet corners of the world, one dog and one handler at a time. But inside that world, she became something close to legend, not because of the war dog she stopped on her first day, but because of everything that came after. The unit she transformed, the man she saved from himself, the methods she built and gave away, the thousands of dogs who live better lives, and the thousands of handlers who learned to see their partners as partners instead of weapons. And when Emily herself grew old and the day finally came for her to leave the facility that bore her name, the whole command turned out to honor her. Handlers she'd trained and handlers those handlers had trained, and dogs by the dozens generations of them, all of them descended in some way from the moment a woman nobody wanted walked onto a base and refused to be afraid. Dawson Old himself by then stood up to speak, and he told the story one last time. The gate he'd opened to break her, the war dog he'd sent to make her run, the two words that stopped everything. I've had a lot of years to think about what happened on this base. Dawson said, his voice steady despite his age. And I've come to understand something. I thought I was testing her that day. I thought I was going to prove she didn't belong. But I had it exactly backwards. She wasn't the one being tested. I was. All of us were. And she was the one grading us. Not on whether we could control a dome, on whether we could learn to love one. He looked at Emily sitting in the front row. She walked in here and held up a mirror, and she made every single one of us look at ourselves. And most of us didn't like what we saw. I sure didn't. But she never gave up on a single one of us. Not the boss, not the men, not even me, and God knows I gave her reason to. He paused and the room was silent. People ask me all the time what the Carter method really is, Dawson said. They think it's a set of protocols, a training system, a better way to handle dogs. And it is all of that, but that's not what it really is. He looked out at the crowd. What it really is a simple idea that this woman spent her whole life proving. That strength and gentleness were never opposites. That the strongest thing you can ever do is refuse to meet fear with more fear. That the quietest voice in the room is very often the one that changes everything. His voice roughened. She stopped a war dog with two words, but she stopped a whole lot more than that. She stopped me from becoming a man I'd have hated. She stopped 100 handlers from breaking the dogs they loved. She stopped a way of thinking that had hurt more animals than any of us will ever know. All of it, with two words and the courage to stand still when everyone expected her to run. He raised a glass. To Emily Carter, he said, the woman nobody expected, and the one none of us will ever forget. And the whole room rose to its feet. Emily sat there old now, surrounded by a lifetime of work made flesh by the family she'd never expected to have, by the dogs sleeping easy in kennels across the country because of a truth she'd refused to stop telling, and she thought about her first day. The empty yard, the whispers, the bag she'd carried alone because nobody offered to help. She'd walked onto that base with nothing but the truth and the courage to stand still. And it had been enough. It had always been enough. The story of Emily Carter was never really about stopping a K9 attack. It was never about two words of German or a war dog frozen inches from her boots or the impossible things she did on a hot afternoon in San Diego. It was about a simple, unbreakable truth that she spent her whole life proving to anyone who would listen. That compassion is not weakness. That the strongest bond in the world is not built on control, but on trust. That every frightened, aggressive, defensive creature, whether it walks on four legs or two, is really just waiting for someone to show them they don't have to be afraid anymore. And that's sometimes the quietest voice in the room, the one nobody respected, the one everyone expected to break, is the one that ends up changing everything. Emily Carter proved it with her whole life. And the proof outlived her in every dog that ever slept without fear and every handler who ever learned to listen. That was her legacy. That was her victory. That was the truth she left behind. Compassion and strength were never opposites. And the quietest voice in the room was the one everyone remembered.